Daniel Reed's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he checked the clock. 4:47 p.m. 13 minutes to make a 20-minute drive. One more late arrival and he'd lose everything. The job that fed his daughter, the insurance that covered her medications, the fragile stability he'd fought 3 years to build since his wife died. Then he saw her. A woman, heavily pregnant, alone beside a broken-down car on an empty country road, one hand pressed against her back, the other shielding her eyes against the fading sun. Daniel's foot hovered over the gas pedal. Every rational thought screamed, "Keep driving," but his hands were already turning the wheel. That single choice, made in 3 seconds of conscience over survival, would expose a truth powerful enough to reshape an entire company. This is the story of what happened when decency collided with desperation, and why sometimes the smallest acts of integrity echo the loudest. If you want to see how one father's impossible choice changed everything, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you what really happened that afternoon. The afternoon rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds that turned the November light gray and weak. Daniel Reed drove his 15-year-old Honda Civic down Route 47 with the careful focus of a man who couldn't afford a single mistake. The check engine light had been on for 2 months. The rear tire was worn dangerously thin. And the clock on the dashboard, the only part of the car that still worked perfectly, read 4:47 p.m. His shift review meeting was scheduled for 5 p.m. sharp. Daniel's fingers tightened on the wheel as he calculated distances and speed limits with the grim precision he'd developed over 3 years of single parenthood. 20 minutes to Sterling Industrial Park. 13 minutes remaining. If he pushed 5 miles over the limit and caught the lights right, he might make it with 2 minutes to spare. He couldn't be late. Not again. The warning from his supervisor still echoed in his mind from 2 weeks ago. "Reed, this is your final notice. I don't care about your personal circumstances. Everyone has problems. You've been late 7 times in 4 months. One more incident and you're done. Do you understand? Done." Daniel understood perfectly. He understood that his daughter Emma's emergency room visit for her asthma attack had cost him 3 late arrivals. He understood that her school's early dismissal for parent-teacher conferences had cost him 2 more. He understood that the morning her medication ran out, the morning he'd spent 90 minutes on hold with the insurance company, then racing to the pharmacy, had cost him another. He understood that none of that mattered to Richard Vance, his floor supervisor at Morrison Manufacturing Solutions, a man who measured employee worth by clock-in times and compliance reports, not by the quality of work or the weight of circumstances. Morrison Manufacturing Solutions. The name itself was a monument to corporate efficiency, a mid-sized industrial equipment manufacturer that supplied components to larger companies across 3 states. Daniel had worked there for 6 years, the last 3 in the quality control department. His actual work was exemplary. He'd caught defects that would have cost the company hundreds of thousands in recalls. He'd streamlined 2 inspection processes that saved 40 hours of labor per month. His error rate was 0.3%, the lowest in the department, none of which mattered if he walked through the door at 5:01 p.m. The road ahead stretched empty and straight through farmland that had long since been harvested, fields of stubble turning gold in the weak afternoon light. Daniel pressed the accelerator slightly, watching his speed climb to 62 in a 55 zone. Risky, but necessary. The meeting would determine whether he kept his job through the new year, whether Emma's insurance continued, whether they kept the apartment or joined the growing number of families living in extended-stay motels, or worse, whether he'd failed her the way he feared he failed her every day since Sarah died. The thought of his late wife hit him like it always did, sudden and sharp, a wound that 3 years hadn't begun to heal. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah had always known what to do. She'd been the steady one, the planner, the one who could stretch a paycheck and a pantry through impossible weeks. She'd been the one Emma ran to with scraped knees and bad dreams. Now Emma ran to him, and Daniel lived in constant terror that he wasn't enough. The clock clicked to 4:48 p.m. 12 minutes. Daniel rounded a gentle curve, his mind already rehearsing what he'd say to Vance. Professional, respectful, confident. I apologize for the previous delays, sir. I've arranged backup transportation for Emma through a neighbor. It won't happen again. That last part was a lie. Mrs. Chen next door was kind, but she worked evenings 3 days a week. Emma's school was 2 miles away. Her asthma could flare without warning. Daniel had no backup that didn't cost money he didn't have or rely on kindness he'd already borrowed too often. But he'd say it anyway. He'd say whatever he needed to say. The road straightened again, and that's when Daniel saw her. A car sat pulled off on the shoulder ahead. A dark gray sedan, expensive-looking even from a distance. Mercedes, maybe, or Audi. The kind of car Daniel saw in the executive parking lot at Morrison, but never in his section of the lot where the rusted Hondas and dented pickups clustered together like embarrassed relatives at a wealthy family reunion. A woman stood beside the car, one hand braced against the roof, the other pressed against her lower back. Even from 200 yards, Daniel could see she was heavily pregnant, very pregnant, the kind of late-term roundness that meant the baby could come any time. She was alone. Daniel's foot instinctively lifted from the accelerator as his car approached. The woman turned toward the sound of his engine, her face pale and drawn. She didn't wave or call out. She just stood there, one hand on the car for support, watching him approach with an expression that was equal parts hope and resignation, the look of someone who'd already been disappointed and was prepared to be disappointed again. Daniel's eyes flicked to the clock, 4:49 p.m., 11 minutes. His brain performed the calculation automatically. If he stopped, he'd lose at minimum 5 minutes. Probably more. The woman had a cell phone. Everyone had cell phones. She could call for help. A tow truck. A friend. Her husband. Someone who wasn't racing against a deadline that meant the difference between feeding his daughter and losing everything. His foot moved back toward the gas pedal, but his hands wouldn't turn the wheel away. Daniel saw Emma's face in his mind, not as she was now at 8 years old, but as she'd been at 4, the last time Sarah had been healthy. They'd been driving home from the grocery store when they'd seen an elderly man fallen on the sidewalk. Sarah had pulled over immediately, stayed with him until the ambulance came, held his hand and told him stories to keep him calm. Emma had watched from the car window, her small face serious and intent. Later that night she'd asked, "Mama, why did you stop?" And Sarah had said, "Because that's what people do, sweetheart. When someone needs help and you can help, you stop. Even when you're busy? Especially when you're busy, because that's when it matters most." Daniel's car rolled past the woman, and in his rearview mirror, he watched her shoulders sag, watched her turn back toward her broken vehicle with the defeated posture of someone abandoned. "God damn it," Daniel whispered. He pulled over 30 yards ahead of her and put the car in park. For 5 full seconds, he sat there, both hands on the wheel, staring at the clock that now read 4:50 p.m. 10 minutes. He was throwing away everything. His job, his daughter's security, the life he'd barely managed to hold together. But Sarah's voice was louder than his fear. That's what people do. Daniel stepped out of the car. The November air was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and distant rain. His shoes squelched in the mud along the shoulder as he walked back toward the woman. She watched him approach with an expression he couldn't quite read, relief mixed with something else. Wariness, maybe, or assessment. Up close, Daniel could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and intelligent eyes that studied him carefully. Her clothes were expensive, tailored maternity pants and a wool coat that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Her car was indeed a Mercedes, sleek and spotless except for the mud along the bottom. And she was very, very pregnant. 8 months at least, maybe more. "Car trouble?" Daniel asked, keeping his distance, trying to look harmless. He was aware of how this might appear, a strange man approaching a vulnerable woman on an isolated road. "I can call someone for you, or I have jumper cables if it's the battery." "It's not the battery." Her voice was calm, controlled, with an undertone of discomfort that Daniel recognized from Sarah's final pregnancy. "The engine just died. I managed to coast off the road, but it won't restart. No warning, no strange sounds, just stopped." Daniel glanced at his watch. 4:51 p.m. "Did you call for roadside assistance?" "I tried. I'm apparently outside the service zone for my usual provider, and the local towing company said they're dealing with accidents from the rain. Earliest they can come is 90 minutes. She shifted her weight, one hand moving to her lower back again. Which would be fine, except I'm supposed to be at a prenatal appointment in 40 minutes, and I'm already considered high risk. My doctor is not happy when I'm late. Something in the way she said it, the mix of frustration and genuine worry, made Daniel's decision before his brain could overrule it. "Pop the hood," he said. "Let me take a look." She studied him for a moment, and Daniel had the strange sensation of being evaluated in some way he didn't fully understand. Then she nodded and reached inside the car. The hood released with a soft click. Daniel raised it and propped it open, looking down at an engine that was far more complex and computerized than anything in his ancient Civic. But the basics were the same, and Daniel had learned over years of necessity how to diagnose and fix most common problems. He checked the battery connections first, tight and clean. No obvious leaks, no loose hoses. Everything looked factory perfect, which meant the problem was likely electrical. "Try starting it," he called out. The woman slid into the driver's seat with some difficulty, her belly barely fitting behind the wheel. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. Not the battery, not the starter. Fuel delivery maybe, or a sensor failure. Daniel glanced at his watch again. 4:53 p.m. 7 minutes. He should leave right now, give her his phone number, tell her to call him if the tow truck didn't come. Save himself, save Emma. Instead, he knelt in the mud beside the car, his work pants soaking through immediately, and started checking fuses. "You don't have to do this," the woman said from the driver's seat. Her voice was closer now, and Daniel could hear the tightness in it, pain or stress or both. "You were clearly in a hurry. I saw you speeding before you pulled over." "Wasn't speeding," Daniel said automatically, then caught himself. "Okay, I was speeding, a little. I'm supposed to be somewhere." "Then you should go." "Probably." Daniel found the fuse box, opened it, and started checking connections with hands that moved with practiced efficiency. "But I'm already here, and you need help, so you're the kind of person who stops." Something in her tone made Daniel glance up. She was watching him again with that same assessing look, and he had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing more than just a man in muddy work clothes trying to fix her car. "I'm the kind of person whose wife would haunt me if I didn't," Daniel said, turning back to the fuses. "These all look fine. Might be the fuel pump relay." "Your wife sounds like a good person." "Was. She passed away 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." Daniel found the relay he was looking for and pulled it, examining it in the gray light. "Yeah, me too." He reinstalled the relay and moved to check the mass airflow sensor. "You have anyone you can call? Your husband? Someone to let them know you'll be late?" "I'm not married, and the only person who needs to know is my doctor, whom I already texted." She shifted in the seat again, and Daniel heard her breath catch. "Are you going to make your appointment?" "Meeting, work thing, and no, probably not." Daniel found the connection he was looking for, a loose wire on the sensor, barely visible but enough to cause the engine to cut out. "But it's fine." "It doesn't sound fine." "It's not. But it is what it is." Daniel reconnected the wire, made sure it was seated properly, then closed the hood. He was covered in mud now, his pants soaked, his hands filthy. The clock in his peripheral vision read 4:57 p.m. 3 minutes. It was over. He'd made his choice. And somehow, standing there in the cold beside a stranded pregnant woman on an empty road, Daniel found he didn't regret it. "Try it now," he said. The woman turned the key, and the engine caught immediately, purring to life with the expensive smoothness of German engineering. Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something else, a calculating expression that made Daniel wonder again what exactly she was thinking. She stepped out of the car slowly, one hand supporting her belly. "Thank you, really, She paused, studying him. "You said this was a work meeting you're missing?" "Review meeting with my supervisor. I've been late a few times. Too many times. This was the final straw meeting." Daniel tried to smile, but it felt hollow. "Turns out, I'm better at fixing cars than keeping jobs." "You were late because of emergencies? Family things?" Daniel hesitated, wondering why he was telling a complete stranger any of this. Maybe because she was a complete stranger. Maybe because none of it mattered anymore. My daughter has asthma. She's 8. Sometimes she needs me more than work does. My supervisor doesn't see it that way. What's your supervisor's name? The question was so unexpected, delivered in such a calm, authoritative tone, that Daniel answered before he thought about it. Richard Vance. But it's not his fault. The policy is the policy. I knew the rules. Where do you work? Morrison Manufacturing Solutions. I'm in quality control. Was in quality control. Daniel checked his watch, 4:58 p.m. The meeting was starting right now. Vance would be looking at the clock, making notes. Final strike. Terminated. The woman reached into her car and pulled out a business card holder from the center console. She extracted a card and held it out to Daniel. My name is Elena Morrison, she said. Come to this address tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Ask for me specifically. Daniel took the card automatically, his mud-stained fingers leaving marks on the expensive paper. He looked down at it and his brain stuttered, trying to process what he was seeing. The card was simple and elegant. Elena Morrison, founder and CEO, Morrison Manufacturing Solutions. Below that, an address he recognized immediately, the executive office building at the far end of the industrial park, the place where people like Daniel never went unless they were being fired. Daniel looked up at her, his mind racing. You're not serious. I'm very serious. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Elena Morrison, CEO. Elena Morrison moved toward her car door, then paused. That wire will hold for now, but you should have the sensor replaced soon. And Mr. Reed? How do you know my... Daniel stopped, realization dawning. My work shirt. The name tag. Don't call anyone tonight. Don't resign. Don't assume anything. Just come to the address on that card tomorrow morning. She eased herself into the driver's seat, started to close the door, then stopped again. And thank you for stopping, for taking the time, for... Her voice caught slightly. For treating me like a person who needed help, not an opportunity or an obligation. She closed the door before Daniel could respond. The Mercedes pulled smoothly back onto the road, accelerated with the confident power of expensive machinery, and disappeared around the curve. Daniel stood alone on the shoulder of Route 47, covered in mud, holding a business card that proved the pregnant woman he'd just helped wasn't just any stranded motorist. She was the owner of the company currently firing him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number within the Morrison system. Review meeting concluded. Return your security badge and collect final paycheck Monday. 8 a.m. R. Vance. Daniel looked at the text, looked at the business card, looked at the empty road where the Mercedes had disappeared. What? He said to the gray November sky. The hell just happened? The drive home took 40 minutes through evening traffic, giving Daniel plenty of time to replay the encounter in his mind, to study the business card propped against his gear shift, to wonder whether the entire thing had been some kind of fever dream. Elena Morrison, founder and CEO. Daniel had worked at Morrison Manufacturing Solutions for 6 years and had never seen the founder. The company employed 300 people across 2 facilities. Executives were distant, theoretical figures whose names appeared on company-wide emails, but who never visited the manufacturing floor or the quality control offices. Yet he'd just spent 15 minutes fixing her car on the side of Route 47. And she'd told him to come to the executive office tomorrow morning. Daniel tried to make sense of it as he navigated through traffic. Was it gratitude? A courtesy interview before they officially processed his termination? Some kind of corporate damage control to make sure he didn't complain about wrongful termination? Except he hadn't been wrongfully terminated. He'd been late. Repeatedly. The policy was clear. Unless... Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. Unless she was going to offer him something. A reference letter. A severance package beyond the standard 2 weeks. Something to soften the blow of losing the job he'd relied on to keep Emma fed and housed and healthy. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it made Daniel's stomach clench with a complicated mix of gratitude and shame. He didn't want charity. He'd earned his position through 6 years of excellent work. He'd earned the right to be judged on his performance, not his circumstances. But circumstances were what had gotten him fired. His phone rang as he turned onto his street, Maple Drive in the old part of town, where the houses were small and close together, where most of his neighbors worked the same kinds of jobs he did, where everyone was one bad month away from not making rent. "Hey, Mrs. Chen," Daniel answered, putting the call on speaker. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Daniel. Emma is having dinner with us. I made too much rice, you know how it is." Mrs. Chen's gentle lie was transparent and kind. She hadn't made too much rice. She'd made exactly enough for her own family and had chosen to include Emma because she knew Daniel's paycheck was stretched thin. "She can stay until you get home, no problem." "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Thank you so much." "It's nothing. She's teaching my grandson how to draw cats, very important work." Daniel ended the call and parked in front of the Chen family's house. A mirror image of his own rental 3 doors down, small and neat with a postage stamp yard and siding that had been patched many times. Through the front window, he could see Emma at the dining table, bent over a piece of paper with fierce concentration, her dark hair falling forward. She looked so much like Sarah in that moment that Daniel's chest tightened. He sat in the car for a minute, organizing his thoughts, planning what he'd tell her. Not the whole truth, never the whole truth. Emma was 8. She didn't need to know how close they were to the edge, how much weight rested on every shift he worked, every paycheck he brought home. But she'd need to know something, that he'd be looking for new work, that things might be tight for a while, that they'd be okay because they were always okay, even when they weren't. Daniel checked his reflection in the rearview mirror and winced. His shirt was filthy, his pants soaked and mud-stained. The professional, put-together father he tried to project for Emma's sake looked like he'd been wrestling in a ditch, which, essentially, he had. He grabbed his jacket from the back seat to cover the worst of the damage and headed inside. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself at him the moment he walked through the door, wrapping thin arms around his waist. "Mrs. Chen made spring rolls, and I helped wrap 3 of them, and Mr. Chen said one of mine was perfect, and Tommy and I drew 17 cats, and I think I'm getting better at the ears. Do you want to see?" Daniel hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and whatever soap Mrs. Chen had used to wash Emma's hands before dinner. "I definitely want to see. Let me thank Mrs. Chen first, okay?" "She made extra for you." Emma tugged him toward the kitchen. "She said you probably didn't eat lunch again." Mrs. Chen stood at the counter, wrapping the promised extra spring rolls in aluminum foil. Her round face creased with the concern of someone who'd raised 4 children and knew exactly what a missed meal looked like. Her husband sat at the table reading the newspaper, nodding to Daniel in greeting. Mrs. Thus. "Chen, you didn't have to." "I made too much," she said firmly, pressing the foil package into his hands. "You know me, always cooking for an army. Emma was a perfect guest, very polite. She learned from the best." Daniel accepted the food with gratitude that felt like it might choke him. "Thank you, really." "How was your meeting?" Daniel glanced at Emma, who was showing her cat drawings to Mr. Chen with detailed explanations of ear shapes and whisker placement. "It went differently than expected. I'll tell you about it later." Mrs. Chen's eyes sharpened with understanding. She didn't press, just nodded. "You let me know if you need anything at all." "I will. Thank you." Daniel collected Emma and her artwork and walked the 3 houses back to their own rental, Emma chattering the entire way about cat anatomy and the proper ratio of whiskers to head size, and did he know that some cats have 6 toes? Their house was dark and cold. Daniel had turned the heat down during the day to save money, a habit from last winter that he'd never quite broken. He flicked on lights and adjusted the thermostat while Emma spread her drawings across the coffee table for his inspection. "These are amazing, sweetie. This one especially. You really captured the expression." Daniel studied a drawing of a calico cat with alert eyes and perked ears. "Where'd you learn to draw like this?" "YouTube. There's a lady who teaches art. She's really good." Emma settled onto the couch, pulling a blanket around herself. "Are you okay, Daddy? You look sad." Daniel had learned years ago that lying to Emma was pointless. She read him too well, absorbed emotions like a radio picking up signals. Sarah used to call her their emotional weather vane, always accurate, always tuned in. "I'm tired," he said, which was true, "and work was complicated today. but nothing we can't handle. Did you get in trouble for being late? So she'd known. Of course she'd known. Emma always knew. Sort of. But I had a good reason. Daniel sat beside her and pulled her close. I helped someone who needed it, a lady whose car broke down. Like Mama used to do. Exactly like Mama used to do. Emma was quiet for a moment, then, "Is that why you look sad? Because you thought about Mama?" "A little bit, but also because I'm proud. I think Mama would be proud too." "She would." Emma said it with such certainty, such absolute conviction, that Daniel had to blink hard against the sudden sting in his eyes. "Is the lady okay? The one whose car broke down?" "She's fine. I fixed her car, and she's fine." "Good." Emma yawned, the kind of full-body yawn that meant bedtime was approaching whether she admitted it or not. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" The question hit like a punch. Daniel wrapped both arms around his daughter and held her close. "We're going to be fine, Em. We're always going to be fine. I promise." He felt her nod against his chest, felt her relax into the certainty of his promise. A promise that he had no idea how to keep, but would find a way to keep anyway, because that's what fathers did. What good fathers did. What fathers who stopped to help stranded pregnant women on empty roads did, even when it cost them everything. After Emma went to bed, a process that involved 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, and 1 detailed discussion about whether cats could understand human language, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen's spring rolls and the business card that might or might not represent salvation. He'd already looked up Elena Morrison online. The search had returned dozens of articles, several interviews, and a professional profile that painted the picture of a self-made success story. Elena Morrison had founded the company 15 years ago with a business loan and 1 major contract. She'd grown it steadily through smart acquisitions and a reputation for quality that attracted consistent clients. She was known for being demanding but fair, for maintaining lean operations, for refusing to compromise on safety or standards. The articles mentioned nothing about pregnancy, which made sense. That was personal, not professional news. But they painted a picture of someone formidable, someone who didn't waste time or tolerate incompetence, someone who'd been alone and stranded and had needed help, someone who'd watched Daniel sacrifice his job to provide that help. Daniel turned the business card over in his hands, studying the embossed lettering, the heavy paper stock, the address that represented a world completely foreign to him. He should feel hopeful. Instead, he felt like a man standing at the edge of something he didn't understand, looking down into depths he couldn't see. His phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number he recognized, Jake from work, one of the few people in quality control who'd gone out of his way to be friendly. "Hey man, heard about the meeting. That's rough. Vance is an asshole. Let me know if you need a reference." Daniel typed back, "Thanks. Appreciate it. I'll be okay." He set the phone down and ate Mrs. Chen's spring rolls mechanically, tasting nothing, his mind churning through scenarios and possibilities, and the strange, surreal fact that he'd apparently fixed the CEO's car without having any idea who she was. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Daniel would be there. Not because he expected anything, not because he assumed anything, but because a woman who owned an entire company had asked him to come. And Daniel Reed, single father, recently fired quality control specialist, man who stopped for stranded pregnant women on empty roads, still believed that when someone asked for your presence, you showed up, even when you had no idea what you were walking into. Daniel woke at 6 a.m. to Emma's alarm blaring down the hall, a cheerful pop song that she'd chosen herself and that he'd grown to hate with the passion of 1,000 suns. He dragged himself out of bed, made coffee, and started the morning routine that had become as automatic as breathing. Wake Emma, convince Emma to get dressed, negotiate breakfast options, pack lunch, check backpack, brush teeth, find shoes, remind her about homework, check for inhaler, out the door by 7:15. This morning, though, the routine felt different, heavier. Emma sat at the kitchen table pushing cereal around in her bowl, watching him with the same assessing look she'd inherited from her mother. "You're wearing your interview clothes." Daniel glanced down at himself. Clean khakis, button-down shirt, tie that he'd only worn twice before. I have a meeting this morning. A job interview? Sort of, maybe. I don't really know what it is, honestly. With the lady whose car you fixed? Daniel paused in the middle of making Emma's lunch. How did you... You said she gave you her business card, and you keep looking at it, and you're nervous. Emma took a bite of cereal, chewed thoughtfully. Are you going to get your job back? I don't know, Em. Maybe. Or maybe it's just a conversation. I'll know more after the meeting. Okay. Emma returned to her cereal with the easy acceptance of a child who trusted her father to handle adult problems. Can we have spaghetti for dinner? Sure, sweetie. Spaghetti sounds good. Daniel finished packing her lunch, sandwich, apple, crackers, juice box, and tried not to think about how many more school lunches he could afford before his final paycheck ran out. The Morrison Manufacturing Solutions Executive Building was a study in understated corporate elegance, 3 stories of glass and steel at the far end of the industrial park, landscaped and maintained in a way that the manufacturing buildings decidedly were not. Daniel had driven past it hundreds of times and never once considered going inside. Now he stood in the parking lot at 8:55 a.m., his Civic looking profoundly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs and Teslas, checking his reflection one more time in the side mirror. Professional, confident, not terrified. He was absolutely terrified. Daniel had no idea what to expect. An apology, a severance package, a polite conversation that ended with a handshake and best wishes for his future. Maybe Elena Morrison simply wanted to thank him properly, in person, for helping her yesterday. Or maybe the thought made his stomach clench. Maybe she wanted to make sure he wasn't going to sue for wrongful termination or make trouble for the company. Only one way to find out. Daniel walked through the glass doors into a lobby that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Polished floors, modern furniture, a reception desk where a professional-looking woman in her 30s smiled with practiced warmth. Good morning. How can I help you? I'm supposed to meet with Elena Morrison at 9. My name is Daniel Reed. The receptionist's smile didn't waver, but something in her expression sharpened with interest. Of course, Mr. Reed. Mrs. Morrison is expecting you. Top floor, office at the end of the hall. You can take the elevator on the right. Thank you. The elevator rose smoothly, quietly, revealing 3 floors of offices through glass walls. Professional spaces where people in business casual worked at standing desks and held meetings in glass-walled conference rooms. Daniel caught glimpses of whiteboards covered in production schedules, monitors displaying inventory systems, people who looked confident and comfortable in ways he'd never felt in any workplace. The top floor was quieter, more spacious, actual walls instead of glass, offices with doors, and at the end of a hallway lined with framed photos of the company's history, a corner office with an open door. Daniel knocked. Come in. He stepped inside and found himself in an office that managed to be both elegant and functional. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the industrial park, a large desk with 2 monitors, comfortable chairs, and everywhere, photos of manufacturing processes and company milestones. Elena Morrison sat behind the desk, looking substantially more composed than she had yesterday on Route 47. Her dark hair was styled professionally, her maternity dress clearly expensive, but the exhaustion around her eyes was genuine, and when she saw Daniel, her expression softened. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please sit. Would you like coffee? Water? I'm fine, thank you. Daniel sat carefully, aware of every movement, every word. I wasn't sure what to expect. That's fair. Yesterday was unusual. Elena folded her hands on her desk and studied him with the same assessing look from the road. I should start with an explanation. That car trouble wasn't planned, obviously, but I wasn't lying when I said I was heading to a prenatal appointment. I've been ordered to reduce stress, limit physical activity, and generally take better care of myself. Driving myself to appointments probably doesn't qualify. Is everything okay with the pregnancy? It will be, but I'm older than ideal for a first pregnancy, doing this alone and running a mid-sized manufacturing company. My doctor has opinions about my work-life balance. She said it with dry humor that made Daniel almost smile. The car dying was just the latest reminder that control is an illusion. I'm sorry, that sounds stressful. It is, but you didn't come here to discuss my prenatal care. Elena opened a folder on her desk, and Daniel's stomach dropped when he recognized his own employee file. Tell me about your work at Morrison. Daniel swallowed hard. I've been in quality control for 6 years. Before that, I worked on the manufacturing floor for 2 years, then moved up when a position opened. My error rate is 0.3%. I've caught defects that saved. I've seen your performance reviews. Elena tapped the file. Your actual work is exemplary. You've prevented 2 potential recalls, streamlined the inspection process for component X47, and consistently exceed production quality standards. Your immediate supervisor before Richard Vance called you the best hire I've made in 20 years. Daniel blinked. I didn't know that. Of course you didn't. Vance doesn't share positive feedback. He operates on the principle that criticism motivates and praise makes people complacent. Elena leaned back in her chair. Tell me about your attendance record. This was it, the reason he was here. Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes. I've been late 7 times in 4 months. 5 of those times were because my daughter had medical emergencies, asthma attacks, or medication issues. 2 were for school obligations I couldn't reschedule. I submitted formal requests for flexible arrival times through the proper channels. All were denied by Mr. Vance. You're a single parent. Yes, ma'am. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Emma, my daughter, is 8. She has asthma, which sometimes requires emergency care. I do my best to balance work and her needs, but sometimes her needs have to come first. That must be difficult. Daniel caught himself before saying fine or manageable, or any of the other lies he'd perfected. Elena Morrison wasn't asking out of politeness. She genuinely wanted to know. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm not always good at it, but I try. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an expression Daniel couldn't read. Then she said, Tell me about yesterday, about stopping to help me. There's not much to tell. You needed help. I could help, so I stopped. Even though it cost you your job. I didn't know it would. Daniel stopped, shook his head. That's not true. I knew exactly what it would cost. I saw the clock. I knew I wouldn't make the meeting. I stopped anyway. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel thought about Sarah's voice, about Emma watching her mother stop for strangers, about the kind of man he wanted to be versus the kind of man survival had forced him to become. Because my wife taught my daughter that's what people do, Daniel said quietly. They stop. They help. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs them something. And I can't teach Emma that lesson and then ignore it myself. Elena nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she already suspected. Mr. Reed, I have a problem. Would you like to hear about it? Yes? 15 years ago, I started this company with the goal of building something that treated employees like human beings, not production units. I wanted fair wages, good benefits, opportunities for advancement based on merit. I wanted people to feel valued. She paused. Yesterday, a man risked his job to help a stranger. That same man has been denied reasonable accommodations for legitimate family medical emergencies. Those 2 facts should not coexist in the same company. Daniel's heart started to pound. Miss Morrison, when I got home last night, I did something I don't do often enough. I pulled your complete file. I read every performance review, every efficiency report, every quality metric, and then I looked at Richard Vance's management record. Elena's expression hardened. Do you know how many formal accommodation requests he's denied in the past 2 years? No, ma'am. 23. 23 employees have requested flexible scheduling, family medical leave, or other reasonable accommodations under company policy. He's denied all of them. Do you know how many appeals reached my office? Daniel shook his head. None. Because Vance tells people that appealing is a black mark on their record and a sign of not being a team player. He discourages formal complaints, dismisses legitimate concerns, and runs his department through intimidation. She closed the file. I didn't know. That's on me. But I know now. What are you saying? Elena Morrison leaned forward, her hands flat on the desk. I'm saying you're reinstated effective immediately with full back pay for the hours you would have worked. I'm saying Richard Vance is being removed from supervisory duties pending a full investigation into his management practices. And I'm saying that Morrison Manufacturing Solutions is implementing a company-wide flexible scheduling policy, with your input if you're willing to provide it. The words hit Daniel like a physical impact. He couldn't process them, couldn't arrange them into meaning. You're giving me my job back. I'm correcting a significant management failure. You should never have been in a position where helping another human being cost you your livelihood. But the policy assumes good faith management. Vance abused that policy. Elena's voice was firm, authoritative. I built this company on certain principles, Mr. Reed. Yesterday you proved you understand those principles better than the man I trusted to enforce them. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come back. Say you'll help me fix this. Say you'll bring the same integrity you showed on Route 47 to helping build a better system. Elena smiled, and it was genuine, warm. And say you'll accept my apology for not catching this sooner. You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do enough right. There's a difference. She stood, carefully, one hand supporting her belly, and extended her other hand. So, do we have an agreement? Daniel stood automatically and took her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone who meant every word she'd spoken. Yes, he managed. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Report to HR this afternoon. They'll have your updated schedule and the details of your reinstatement. Elena released his hand but didn't move away. And Mr. Reed? Yesterday, when my car broke down, I was scared. I was alone, in pain, and worried something was seriously wrong. You stopped without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. You helped because it was right. That matters to me. It should matter to everyone. Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. I'll see you at work, Elena said. Now, go tell your daughter you can afford spaghetti for dinner. Daniel laughed, a surprised, slightly shaky sound that felt like relief and disbelief and gratitude all mixed together. How did you mentioned spaghetti on your way out yesterday. You were on the phone with your daughter. Elena smiled. I pay attention. Daniel walked out of the executive building into bright November sunlight that felt warmer than any light had felt in months. His hand shook slightly as he pulled out his phone and dialed Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen, it's Daniel. Is Emma still at school? Good. Can you tell her? His voice cracked. Can you tell her everything's going to be okay and that we're definitely having spaghetti for dinner? He ended the call and stood in the parking lot, looking back at the building where 15 minutes ago his entire life had changed course, because he'd stopped to help a stranger, because Sarah had taught him that's what people do, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes, doing the right thing didn't cost everything. Sometimes it saved everything instead. Daniel got in his car and drove toward the elementary school, ready to pick up his daughter, ready to tell her the story of how one small act of kindness had reminded a company's founder what her company was supposed to stand for, ready to believe, for the first time in 3 years, that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay after all. The afternoon sunshine felt different as Daniel drove toward Emma's school, warmer somehow, or maybe he was just noticing it for the first time in months. His hands were still shaking slightly on the steering wheel, adrenaline and relief mixing into something that made his chest feel too tight and too open at the same time. He'd gone into that office expecting the worst and had walked out with everything he'd thought he'd lost. More than that, actually. He'd walked out with proof that doing the right thing sometimes mattered in ways you couldn't predict. Daniel pulled into the elementary school parking lot at 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before dismissal. Normally he'd be at work right now, watching the clock and calculating exactly how fast he could drive to make pickup on time. Today, he sat in the pickup lane with nowhere else to be, no supervisor timing his movements, no anxiety tightening around his chest like a vice. Today he could just be a father picking up his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. HR expecting you at 3:30 p.m. Ask for Jennifer Reyes. E.M. Elena Morrison, the woman who'd been stranded on Route 47 yesterday and who'd just handed him his life back. Daniel saved the number and sent a quick reply. I'll be there. Thank you again. The response came immediately. Thank yourself, you earned it. The school bell rang, and within minutes the doors burst open with the controlled chaos of 200 elementary students being released into the world. Daniel spotted Emma immediately, dark ponytail bouncing, backpack nearly as big as she was, talking animatedly with another girl as they walked toward the pickup area. She saw his car and her whole face lit up with surprise. Daddy! Emma ran the last few yards and yanked open the door. What are you doing here? You're never here this early. Did something happen? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. Daniel waited until she was buckled in before pulling out of the lot. I have good news. You got your job back? Emma's voice carried the cautious hope of a child who'd learned not to expect miracles but desperately wanted to believe in them anyway. I got my job back. Really? Like for real? Really? For real, really. Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror and saw tears starting to form in her eyes. Hey, Em, it's okay. I was scared, Daddy. Emma's voice cracked. I heard you on the phone last night talking to someone about jobs, and I thought maybe we'd have to move or I'd have to change schools, or you'd be sad all the time like when Mama first got sick, and I didn't want you to be sad like that again. Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled into a grocery store parking lot and put the car in park, then turned to face his daughter fully. Come here. Emma unbuckled and climbed into the front seat, and Daniel held her while she cried, quiet, gulping sobs that she tried to hide against his shoulder. He rubbed her back and made the soothing sounds Sarah used to make, feeling like the world's biggest failure for not realizing how much Emma had been carrying. I'm sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you by not talking about it, but I should have known you'd figure it out anyway. Daniel pulled back enough to look at her tear-streaked face. You're too smart for your own good sometimes. You know that? Emma hiccuped a laugh. Mama used to say that too. She was right. Listen to me, Em. We're okay. I promise. The lady whose car I fixed yesterday, her name is Ms. Morrison, and she owns the company I work for. She gave me my job back, and she's making sure nobody else gets treated unfairly like I did. Because you helped her? Partly. But mostly because she realized the rules weren't being followed the right way. I just happened to help her see that. Daniel brushed hair from Emma's face. And you know what? We're having spaghetti for dinner like I promised, and maybe ice cream after. On a school night? On a school night. Emma threw her arms around his neck. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Em. More than anything. Daniel held her close and sent a silent thank you to whatever force had put Elena Morrison's car on Route 47 at exactly the moment he'd driven past. Now, how about we go get supplies for the best spaghetti dinner ever? Can we get the fancy sauce, the kind in the glass jar? We can get the fancy sauce? Emma's smile was worth every penny of the splurge. They spent the next hour at the grocery store, Emma riding in the cart like she hadn't done since she was 5, helping choose ingredients with the seriousness of a professional chef. Daniel let her pick garlic bread and salad fixings, and the expensive Parmesan cheese that came in the actual refrigerated section instead of the shelf-stable container. He even let her choose ice cream, cookies and cream, her current favorite. At the checkout, the total made him wince slightly, but for the first time in months, he didn't have to calculate whether buying real Parmesan meant skipping lunch tomorrow. He had his job back. He had back pay coming. He had Elena Morrison's promise that things would be different. He could afford cookies and cream ice cream on a Tuesday. As they loaded groceries into the car, Emma said, Daddy, can I tell Mrs. Chen about your job? She was worried too. How did you know Mrs. Chen was worried? Because she kept asking if we needed anything and making extra food and looking at you the way grown-ups look at each other when they think kids aren't paying attention. Emma climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in. She's nice. I think we should bring her some spaghetti. Daniel's heart swelled with pride and love for this small person who noticed when others were worried, who wanted to share good news with people who cared about them, who understood at 8 years old that community meant looking out for each other. I think that's a great idea, he said. We'll make extra. They drove home through late afternoon traffic, Emma chattering about her day. Math class where she'd gotten all the problems right, art class where they'd started a project about animals, Recess, where her friend Sophia had taught her a new hand clap game. Normal, wonderful, mundane details that Daniel had been too stressed to fully appreciate for months. Today he listened to every word. At home, Emma spread her homework across the coffee table while Daniel started preparing dinner, his phone propped on the counter showing a cooking video for homemade marinara sauce. He'd never attempted it before. Jarred sauce had always been faster and easier, but today felt like a day for trying new things. At 3:15 p.m., he told Emma he had a quick errand and would be back in an hour. Mrs. Chen was home and happy to keep an eye on Emma through the connecting window between their houses, the informal neighborhood watch system that had saved Daniel's sanity more times than he could count. The drive to Morrison Manufacturing Solutions felt surreal. 24 hours ago, Daniel had been racing toward a meeting that would end his employment. Now he was driving back to meet with HR about his reinstatement, about helping design new policies, about being part of fixing something broken. The HR office was on the second floor of the executive building, a suite of professional spaces that Daniel had never had reason to visit before. Jennifer Reyes turned out to be a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that reminded Daniel of the best teachers Emma had ever had, warm but organized, friendly but focused. "Mr. Reed, please have a seat." She gestured to a chair across from her desk and pulled up files on her computer. "I understand we're processing your reinstatement today." "Yes, ma'am." Elena briefed me on the situation. "I want to start by saying that on behalf of Morrison Manufacturing Solutions, I apologize. You should never have been put in a position where legitimate family medical emergencies resulted in disciplinary action." Jennifer's expression was genuinely apologetic. "We failed you, and we're going to do better." "Thank you. I appreciate that." "Let's go through the details." Jennifer pulled up a document. "You're being reinstated to your position in quality control effective immediately. You'll receive full back pay for all hours you would have worked between your termination yesterday and your reinstatement today. Your benefits continue uninterrupted. No gap in health insurance coverage." Daniel felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying drain from his shoulders. Emma's insurance, her asthma medications, the inhaler that cost $200 every 3 months, all secure. "Additionally," Jennifer continued, "Elena has asked that you be involved in developing our new flexible scheduling policy. This would be a paid consultation role in addition to your regular duties, approximately 5 hours per week for the next month. Are you interested?" Yes, absolutely, but I'm not sure what I could contribute. I'm not in management or HR. You're someone who's lived the gap between policy and implementation. You understand what parents need, what doesn't work, what reasonable accommodation actually looks like. Jennifer smiled. Elena doesn't want policy written by people who've never had to use it. She wants input from people who know what it's like to balance family emergencies with work obligations. Daniel nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Yes, I'd be happy to help." "Excellent. We'll schedule the first meeting for next week." Jennifer made notes on her computer. "Now, regarding Richard Vance, he's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. You may be asked to provide a statement about your experiences with his management. You're not required to participate, but if you're willing, it would be helpful." "Will other people be giving statements too?" "Yes. We're conducting a comprehensive review of his department management over the past 3 years. You're not alone in this, Mr. Reed." That information settled something in Daniel's chest. He wasn't looking for revenge. He genuinely wasn't. But the thought that Vance had been treating others the same way, denying legitimate requests and creating an environment of fear, made Daniel angry in a way he rarely allowed himself to feel. "I'll participate," he said. "Whatever you need." "Thank you. Someone from our compliance team will contact you to schedule a time." Jennifer pulled up another document. "Last item, your schedule. Your previous shift was Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Does that still work, or would you prefer to discuss adjustments?" Daniel thought about school pickup, about Emma's doctor appointments, about the constant stress of calculating drive times and hoping nothing went wrong. "Could I do 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m.? That would give me more cushion for morning drop-off." "Absolutely. Consider it done," Jennifer typed quickly. "Anything else you need?" "I don't think so. This is already more than I—" Daniel stopped, shook his head. Thank you, really. You're welcome. And Mr. Reed, for what it's worth, I've been here since Elena founded this company. Yesterday's decision, reinstating you, investigating Vance, developing new policies, that's exactly who she is. She just doesn't always know what's happening in the details until someone shows her. Jennifer's expression was thoughtful. I'm glad you showed her. Daniel left the HR office with a folder of paperwork, a new badge, and a schedule that started tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. He sat in his car for a moment, staring at the badge that had been deactivated yesterday and reactivated today. His name and photo proof that he was still Daniel Reed, Quality Control Specialist, employee of Morrison Manufacturing Solutions. Still someone who could provide for his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mrs. Chen wants to know if we're making meatballs. She says her grandmother's recipe is the best if you want it. Daniel smiled and typed back. Tell her yes, please, and thank you. The drive home took 15 minutes through rush hour traffic that didn't stress him for the first time in months. Daniel turned onto Maple Drive as the sun started setting, painting the small houses in warm gold light, Mrs. Chen's porch light already on in welcome. Emma met him at the door, bouncing with excitement. Mrs. Chen is bringing the recipe and already made meatballs because she says teaching someone to cook while they're hungry is setting them up for failure. Her words exactly. Mrs. Chen is wise. Daniel set down his work folder and scooped Emma into a hug. And you, young lady, have homework to finish before dinner. Already done. I did it while you were gone and Mrs. Chen checked the math. Emma wriggled free and ran to the kitchen. Can I help cook? They spent the next hour cooking together, Daniel following Mrs. Chen's handwritten recipe while Emma stirred sauce and set the table with the careful precision of someone who took jobs seriously. Mrs. Chen appeared at their back door right as the pasta finished boiling, carrying a container of meatballs that smelled like heaven. I made too many, she said with the same gentle lie she always used. Tom doesn't eat beef anymore, doctor's orders. You're helping me out. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything, really. Daniel accepted the container and met her eyes. I got my job back. Everything's going to be okay. Mrs. Chen's face creased into a smile that reached her eyes. I knew it would be. You're a good man, Daniel Reed. Good things happen to good people sometimes. Sometimes, Daniel agreed. Would you like to join us for dinner? I already ate, but I'll take some of that sauce recipe if it turns out good. She patted Emma's head. You take care of your daddy, sweetie. Make sure he doesn't burn the garlic bread. I won't let him, Emma promised seriously. They ate dinner at their small kitchen table, Emma talking between bites about her plans to draw Mrs. Chen a thank you card, about whether cats liked spaghetti, about a book she was reading in class. Daniel listened and responded and tasted his food for the first time in what felt like forever. Really tasted it, the garlic and herbs and the richness of Mrs. Chen's meatballs. After dinner, Emma insisted on washing dishes while Daniel dried, the two of them working in comfortable silence broken only by Emma's occasional humming. Then ice cream in front of a nature documentary about snow leopards, Emma curled against his side, both of them content in the simple peace of being together without fear hovering in the background. At bedtime, Emma brushed her teeth and changed into pajamas without the usual negotiations, too tired to argue. Daniel tucked her in and read 2 chapters from the book on her nightstand, a fantasy adventure about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals. Daddy? Emma's voice was sleepy, her eyes already half closed. I'm glad you stopped to help that lady, even though it was scary. Me too, sweetie. Mama would be proud of you. Daniel's throat tightened. I hope so. I know so. Emma yawned. Because I'm proud of you, and Mama and I always agreed about important stuff. She fell asleep before Daniel could respond, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood sleep. Daniel sat beside her bed for a long moment, watching her peaceful face, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that defined every choice he made. Sarah would be proud. He had to believe that. He'd raised their daughter to understand kindness, to value integrity, to know that sometimes the right choice was the hard choice. And he'd shown her through his actions yesterday that those principles weren't just words, they were truths worth living by, even when the cost seemed too high. Especially when the cost seemed too high. Daniel stood quietly and turned off Emma's light, leaving the door cracked the way she liked it. He cleaned up the kitchen, packed Emma's lunch for tomorrow, laid out her school clothes, all the small acts of preparation that defined single parenthood. Then he sat on the couch with his laptop and did something he hadn't done in months. He relaxed. No job applications to fill out, no budget spreadsheets to revise, no fear gnawing at the edge of every moment. Just a quiet Tuesday evening in a small rental house, everything secure, everything okay. Daniel opened his email and found a message from Jennifer Reyes sent an hour ago. Schedule attached for policy development meetings. First session Monday 1 p.m., conference room B. Looking forward to working with you. He opened the attachment and saw a detailed agenda, topics to cover, questions to address, other participants who'd been invited. All people from various departments, various levels, various life situations. Elena Morrison was building something comprehensive, something real. And she wanted Daniel's input. His phone rang, an unknown number. Daniel answered cautiously. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Elena Morrison. I hope I'm not calling too late. Daniel sat up straighter automatically, as if she could see him through the phone. No, ma'am. Emma just went to bed. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I wanted to check in, make sure your meeting with Jennifer went well. It did. Very well. Thank you again for... Daniel stopped, searching for words adequate to what she'd done. For giving me another chance. For seeing past the policy to the actual situation. I should have seen it sooner. That's on me. Elena's voice carried the weight of genuine responsibility. But I'm glad we're fixing it now. Did Jennifer explain the policy development role? She did. I'm honored you'd want my input, though I'm not sure how helpful I'll be. You'll be more helpful than you think. You understand the real-world application of workplace policies in ways most executives never will. Elena paused. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Yesterday, when you stopped to help me, you knew it would cost you your job. But you stopped anyway. Why? Daniel thought about his answer carefully. My wife used to say that the measure of who you are isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when it's hard. When she died, I promised myself I'd raise our daughter to understand that, to be someone who helps people, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. He paused. I couldn't teach her that, and then drive past someone who needed help. The lesson only matters if you live it. Elena was quiet for a moment. Your wife sounds like she was remarkable. She was. She really was. I think she'd be proud of what you did yesterday, and what you're doing now, helping build something better. Daniel's eyes stung. Thank you. That means a lot. I'll let you go, but I wanted you to know that I don't take what you did lightly. You sacrificed something important for a stranger, and that kind of integrity is rare. It's worth protecting. Elena's voice softened slightly. Get some rest, Mr. Reed. I'll see you tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Good night. Daniel ended the call and sat in the quiet living room, processing the conversation. Elena Morrison had called him personally, not as a boss checking on an employee, but as a person acknowledging another person's character. She'd seen something in him worth recognizing, worth building a company policy around, worth believing in. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Heard through the grapevine you're back. Drinks Friday to celebrate? Daniel typed. Can't Friday, but thanks. Coffee sometime next week? You got it. Glad you're back, man. Place wasn't the same without you. More texts came through the evening, coworkers who'd heard the news, friends checking in, even his neighbor Tom asking if he needed anything. Daniel responded to each one, feeling the web of community that he'd been too stressed to fully appreciate wrapping around him with quiet strength. At 10 p.m., he locked the doors, checked on Emma one more time, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he'd go back to work. Back to quality control. Back to the familiar rhythms of inspection and documentation and ensuring that every component met standards. But it would be different now. He'd go back with the knowledge that the CEO knew his name, valued his integrity, wanted his input. He'd go back with a schedule that didn't require racing against impossible deadlines. He'd go back with the security of knowing that if Emma had an emergency, he could handle it without losing everything. He'd go back as someone who'd proven that character mattered, that doing the right thing sometimes had consequences beyond what you could see in the moment. Daniel fell asleep thinking about Route 47, about a stranded pregnant woman and a broken-down Mercedes, about the 3 seconds that had changed everything, about the choice that had cost everything and had given him back more than he'd lost. The next morning arrived with Emma's alarm and the familiar rush of breakfast and backpack checks and remembering homework. Daniel drove her to school at 7:30 a.m., kissed her goodbye, and headed to Morrison Manufacturing Solutions with 20 minutes to spare before his new 8 a.m. start time. The manufacturing floor looked exactly the same as it had Monday. Same machines, same noise, same smell of metal and industrial lubricant. But Daniel walked through those doors differently. His badge scanning smoothly, his presence legitimate, his position secure. Jake met him at his workstation with a coffee and a grin. "Welcome back, man. Place was falling apart without you. We had 3 defects slip through yesterday." 3! Who was covering my section? Temp worker who didn't know X47 components from his own elbow. Vance didn't care as long as someone was in the seat. Jake lowered his voice. "Speaking of Vance, he's gone. Administrative leave. Whole floor's buzzing about it." Daniel set down his coffee and logged into his workstation. "I heard." "Yeah? Well, good riddance. Guy was a nightmare. Made everyone miserable and acted like it was motivation." Jake settled into the next station. "You hear about the new policy thing? Flexible scheduling?" "I'm helping develop it, actually." Jake's eyes widened. "No shit? Wow, that's huge, Dan. Like, actually huge. Half the people on this floor have been struggling with the same stuff you were dealing with. If you can help fix that, I'm going to try." Daniel pulled up his work queue and felt the familiar focus settle over him. "But right now I need to make sure we don't have any more defects slipping through." They worked in companionable sessions for the next hour, Daniel falling back into rhythms he knew by heart: inspect, measure, document, flag anything questionable. His hands moved automatically while his mind processed the changes happening around him. At 10 a.m., Elena Morrison walked onto the manufacturing floor. Conversation stopped. People stared. The CEO never came to the floor. Executives lived in the clean, quiet world of offices and conference rooms, not the loud industrial reality of where products were actually made. But Elena Morrison walked through the facility with confident familiarity, greeting workers by name, pausing to ask questions about processes, her pregnancy obvious but not slowing her down. She wore professional clothes and safety glasses and moved like someone who'd built this company from nothing and knew every inch of how it operated. She stopped at Daniel's station. "Mr. Reed, how's your first morning back?" Daniel straightened, aware of every set of eyes on them. "Good, ma'am. Catching up on some quality flags from yesterday?" "I heard we had defects slip through. That won't happen again." Elena's voice carried across the floor, a statement of fact rather than criticism. "Quality control is essential to everything we do. It's not a position you fill with whoever's available. It requires expertise and attention to detail." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, a public acknowledgement of value that made Daniel's coworkers stand a little straighter. "I appreciate that, ma'am." "I appreciate you being here." Elena nodded to Jake, to the other workers watching, then turned back to Daniel. "Policy meeting is Monday at 1 p.m. Don't be late." It took Daniel a second to realize she was joking, a callback to the reason he'd been fired, delivered with dry humor that made several nearby workers chuckle nervously. "I'll be there early," Daniel said. Elena smiled and continued her walk through the facility, leaving a wake of whispered conversations and speculation. Daniel returned to his work, trying to ignore the attention, but Jake leaned over. "Dude, the CEO just came down here specifically to talk to you. What the hell happened?" "I helped her with a car problem. She appreciated it." "Must have been some appreciation. She doesn't even know my name, and I've been here 8 years. Daniel didn't know how to explain what had happened without sounding self-aggrandizing or making too much of it. So he said simply, "I was in the right place at the right time. That's all." But it wasn't all, and Daniel knew it. Elena Morrison had seen something in that moment on Route 47. Not just a man fixing a car, but a man making a choice that revealed character. And she'd decided that character mattered more than policy compliance. that integrity was worth building a company around. She'd decided Daniel Reed was worth fighting for. The rest of the day passed in focused work, catching up on backlogged inspections, training the temp worker properly before his contract ended, restoring quality standards that had slipped in Daniel's absence. By 4:30 p.m., he'd cleared his queue and documented everything that needed attention. He clocked out, drove to Emma's school, and picked her up with 5 minutes to spare. "How was your first day back?" Emma climbed into the car and buckled her seatbelt. "Good. Really good, actually." Daniel pulled out of the parking lot. "How was school?" "We started fractions and math, and I hate them already. Also, Sophia taught me the rest of the hand clap game, and we did it perfectly 3 times. Emma pulled homework from her backpack. "Mrs. Chen invited us for dinner. She made dumplings." "Of course she did." Daniel smiled. "Tell her thank you, and we'll bring dessert." They stopped at the grocery store for ice cream, a different flavor this time, strawberry for Mrs. Chen, who Daniel knew preferred fruit-based desserts. Then home to drop off backpacks and change out of work clothes before heading next door. Mrs. Chen's house smelled like ginger and soy sauce and the comfort of home-cooked food made with care. Her husband Tom sat at the table reading the newspaper, their grandson Tommy doing homework in the living room. It was loud and warm and full of life in the way their own house used to be when Sarah was alive. Over dumplings and rice and conversation about everything and nothing, Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the constant tension he'd carried for 3 years. He was okay. Emma was okay. They had community, security, enough. They had more than enough. After dinner, Emma played with Tommy while Daniel helped Mrs. Chen clean up, and in the quiet of the kitchen she said, "You look lighter, Daniel, less burdened." "I feel lighter. It's been a good couple of days." "Good. You deserve good days." Mrs. Chen handed him a dish to dry. "Sarah would be happy to see you this way. At peace." Daniel's hand stilled. "I hope so." "I know so. She loved you very much. She'd want you to be happy, to build a good life for Emma, to find joy again." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "You're allowed to be happy, Daniel. Don't forget that." He nodded, not trusting his voice. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and Daniel collected Emma for the walk home. The November evening was cold and clear, stars visible above the streetlights, their breath-forming clouds in the air. "Daddy?" Emma slipped her hand into his as they walked. "I'm glad everything's okay now." "Me too, sweetheart." "Do you think Mama knows about you getting your job back and everything?" Daniel looked up at the stars and thought about Sarah, about the woman who'd taught him that stopping to help people mattered, about the legacy she'd left in their daughter's heart. "Yeah, Em, I think she knows." Emma squeezed his hand. "Good, because I think she's proud of you, for helping that lady, for being brave." "I wasn't brave. I was just trying to do the right thing." "That's what brave means, Daddy, doing the right thing even when it's scary." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, Daniel thought, wisdom he'd never fully appreciated until it came from his own daughter. They reached their house and settled into the evening routine. Homework review, dinner prep for tomorrow, TV time, bath, stories, bed. Normal, beautiful, unremarkable moments that felt precious because Daniel finally had the space to appreciate them. At 9 p.m., with Emma asleep and the house quiet, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and composed an email he'd been thinking about all day. "Miss Morrison, I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to contribute to the flexible scheduling policy development. After thinking about it, I have some initial thoughts I wanted to share before Monday's meeting. 1. Emergency protocols need to be clear and accessible. Parents shouldn't have to navigate complicated approval processes when their child is in the ER. 2. Flexibility should be mutual. Some days I might need to leave early, but I'm happy to stay late when the department needs it. Trust goes both ways. 3. Documentation helps everyone. If we track accommodations transparently, it prevents abuse and proves the system works. I'm looking forward to the discussion Monday. Thank you again for seeing past policy to the person behind it. Daniel Reed." He sent the email before he could second-guess himself, then closed the laptop and headed to bed. His phone buzzed just as he was falling asleep. A text from Elena Morrison. These are excellent starting points. See you Monday. EM. Daniel smiled and set the phone aside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more moments of figuring out how to balance everything. But tonight, he could sleep knowing that he'd made the right choice on Route 47, that integrity had consequences beyond punishment, that sometimes the system could be fixed from the inside, that doing the right thing had changed more than just his life. It had started changing the system itself. The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost decadent. Grocery shopping without calculating every item, taking Emma to the park without checking his watch every 5 minutes, sleeping past 7 on Saturday morning for the first time in recent memory. By Monday afternoon, Daniel found himself standing outside Conference Room B with a notebook full of ideas and the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first day at Morrison 6 years ago. The door was already open. Inside, 5 other people sat around a large table. Jennifer Reyes from HR, 2 women Daniel didn't recognize, a younger man in his 20s, and Elena Morrison at the head of the table, looking somehow both exhausted and energized at the same time. "Mr. Reed, come in." Elena gestured to an empty chair. "We're just getting started. Everyone, this is Daniel Reed from Quality Control. Daniel, let me introduce you to the team. You already know Jennifer. This is Maria Santos from Accounting, David Kim from the manufacturing floor, Lisa Chen from Packaging. No relation to your neighbor, I checked. And Robert Hayes from Logistics." Daniel nodded to each person as he sat down, recognizing David from the floor but having never spoken to the others. They all looked as uncertain as he felt, people pulled from their regular jobs to contribute to something larger than their daily tasks. I've asked you all here because you represent different aspects of this company, and more importantly, different life situations that our current policies don't adequately address. Elena opened a folder in front of her. Maria is a single mother of 3. David's wife has multiple sclerosis. Lisa cares for her elderly father. Robert is finishing his degree at night. And Daniel, as most of you probably know by now, is raising his daughter alone while managing her chronic health condition. The acknowledgement was matter of fact, devoid of pity, simply stating circumstances that shape their realities. Daniel appreciated the directness. Our current attendance and scheduling policies were written 15 years ago when this company was 30 people working out of a warehouse. We've grown, but the policies haven't evolved to reflect the actual lives of the people working here. Elena looked around the table. That changes now. I want to build something that works for everyone, employees and the company. That requires honesty about what's broken and creativity about how to fix it. With all due respect, Ms. Morrison, Lisa spoke up, her voice careful. We've had policies before. Written policies about accommodation and flexibility. They don't matter if supervisors ignore them. You're absolutely right, which is why this isn't just about rewriting the employee handbook. Elena's expression hardened slightly. Richard Vance's investigation revealed that he wasn't the only manager discouraging accommodation requests. We have a culture problem, and culture doesn't change through memos. It changes through accountability and structural reform. Jennifer pulled up a presentation on the screen at the front of the room. We've identified 3 key areas where current policy fails actual practice. First, emergency response protocols. Second, flexible scheduling parameters. Third, communication and approval processes. Daniel sent some preliminary thoughts that touch on all 3. Daniel felt everyone's eyes turn to him. He opened his notebook, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in his chest. I'm not an expert in HR policy or anything. I just know what it feels like to need help and not be able to get it through the official channels. That's exactly why you're here, Elena said. Start with emergency protocols. What would have helped you? Daniel took a breath and looked down at his notes. When Emma has an asthma attack, I have maybe 10 minutes between getting the call and needing to be in the car. There's no time to fill out forms or wait for supervisor approval. I need to be able to text my supervisor family emergency, leaving now, will update when I can, and have that be enough. But how do you prevent abuse? Robert asked. What stops someone from claiming emergencies every week? Documentation after the fact, Maria said, jumping in before Daniel could answer. My daughter broke her arm last year. I left work immediately, but I brought the ER paperwork the next day. You can verify emergencies without requiring pre-approval. Exactly. Daniel nodded at Maria gratefully. Trust first, verify second. Most people aren't going to fake their kid's medical emergency, and for the rare person who might try, the documentation requirement catches it. Jennifer made notes on her laptop. So we're talking about a protocol that allows immediate departure for true emergencies, medical, family crisis, that level of severity, with documentation required within 24 to 48 hours. What counts as an emergency? Lisa asked. My father fell last month. He was fine, just shaken up, but I needed to be there. Is that an emergency? The question opened a discussion that lasted 30 minutes, everyone contributing examples and edge cases, the definition of emergency expanding and contracting as they talked. Daniel listened mostly, offering input when his own experiences were relevant, impressed by how seriously everyone took the task. Elena finally held up a hand. I think we're overcomplicating this. Emergency means something that requires your immediate attention and can't wait for standard scheduling processes. The employee decides in the moment, then documents afterward. If we see patterns of abuse, we address them individually. But we don't build policy around worst-case scenarios. We build it around supporting the 99% of employees who are trying to do right by their families and their work. The room went quiet. David spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. When my wife was first diagnosed, I missed 2 weeks of work because I didn't know how to navigate the medical system and take care of her and keep my job. My supervisor at the time told me I needed to get my priorities straight, like choosing between my wife's health and my job was somehow a moral failing on my part. That supervisor no longer works here, Elena said quietly. I'm sorry that happened to you, David. It shouldn't have. I know, but it did. And I'm not the only one with stories like that. David looked around the table. If we're really doing this, really building something better, it has to be more than words on paper. It has to be cultural. Managers have to believe it, not just comply with it. Which brings us to accountability, Jennifer said, pulling up a new slide. We're proposing mandatory training for all supervisory staff on the new policies, plus quarterly reviews of accommodation requests to ensure they're being handled appropriately. Patterns of denial or discouragement trigger investigation. What about retaliation? Maria's question was blunt. What stops a manager from saying yes to the accommodation but then punishing the employee in other ways? Worse assignments, passed over for promotion, that kind of thing? Elena leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. Anonymous reporting system with investigation protocols. If you request accommodation and subsequently face what you believe is retaliation, you report it. We investigate. And if we find evidence of retaliation, there are consequences up to and including termination. You'd fire a manager for that? Robert sounded skeptical. I'd fire a manager for violating the fundamental principles this company is supposed to stand for. Yes. Elena's voice was firm. We can have the best policies in the world, but if the culture punishes people for using them, they're worthless. I want people to work here because they believe in what we're building, not because they're afraid of what happens if they need help. The conviction in her voice settled something in the room. Daniel felt it. The shift from theoretical discussion to real commitment, from policy development to cultural transformation. They worked through lunch, sandwiches brought in by someone Jennifer had texted, discussing flexible scheduling parameters and documentation requirements and communication protocols. Daniel contributed his experience with school pickup times and medical appointments. Maria talked about childcare complications. David explained the unpredictability of his wife's symptoms. Lisa described the challenges of elder care. By 3 p.m., they had the outline of something comprehensive: emergency protocols, flexible scheduling options, remote work possibilities for positions where it made sense, documentation requirements that verified without burdening, and accountability measures that protected employees from retaliation. This is good work, Elena said, as Jennifer compiled notes into a coherent document. We'll need legal review and another few rounds of refinement, but this is a strong foundation. Thank you, all of you, for your honesty and your input. When do you think this could actually be implemented? Lisa asked. Realistically, 60 days for legal review, policy finalization, and training development. 90 days for full implementation across all departments. Elena looked around the table. I know that feels slow when people need help now, but we're changing 15 years of established practice. It has to be done right, or it won't stick. What happens in the meantime? Daniel heard himself ask. For people who need accommodation before the policy is official? They request it through Jennifer's office directly. We're handling accommodations on a case-by-case basis until the formal policy is in place. Elena met Daniel's eyes. No one else gets fired for family emergencies while we're building the system that should have protected them in the first place. The meeting broke up with handshakes and exchanged contact information, the group dispersing back to their regular jobs with the weight of something larger than themselves settling on their shoulders. Daniel walked back to the quality control floor feeling like he'd participated in something meaningful, something that might actually matter beyond his own situation. Jake met him at his station with raised eyebrows. 3-hour meeting with the CEO. Are you getting promoted or fired? Because honestly, it could go either way at this point. Neither. Just helping with policy stuff. Daniel logged back into his workstation and pulled up his queue. How's the floor been? Quiet. New guy in Vance's position seems decent. Actually knows what quality control is supposed to do, which is refreshing. Jake settled into his own station. You hear they're interviewing people about Vance. I got called in this morning. Yeah, how'd it go? Told them everything. The denied requests, the intimidation tactics, the way he'd pit people against each other. Jake's voice was low but intense. I didn't realize how bad it was until they started asking specific questions. Like, I knew he was an asshole, but hearing them list out patterns of behavior, it was worse than I thought. Daniel's interview was scheduled for Wednesday. He'd been thinking about what to say, how to frame his experiences without sounding vindictive or petty. But maybe the truth was enough. Maybe just stating the facts, the denied accommodation requests, the final warning, the termination, would paint the picture investigators needed. The rest of Monday passed in focused work. Daniel caught 2 defects that would have resulted in component failure, documented both thoroughly, and filed reports that would trigger manufacturing line review. This was what he was good at: the detail work, the careful attention, the refusal to let substandard parts slip through because quality mattered. He left at 4:30 exactly, picked up Emma from after-school care, and drove home through late afternoon traffic that felt manageable now that he wasn't racing against impossible deadlines. How was the big meeting? Emma asked from the back seat, her backpack spilling homework across the seat beside her. Good, really good actually. We're working on making things better for a lot of people. Like you. Like me and like other parents, and like people taking care of family members who are sick or old. Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Grown-up stuff, but important grown-up stuff. Mama used to say the most important stuff is how you treat people when they need help. Daniel's throat tightened. She was right about that. That evening, after homework and dinner and Emma's bath, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started drafting the statement he'd give investigators. He wrote about the accommodation requests he'd submitted formally through the system. Requests for flexible start times, requests for emergency leave protocols, requests that had been denied without discussion or consideration. He wrote about the warnings, the final meeting, the termination. He wrote the truth, simply and clearly, without embellishment or anger. When he finished, the statement was 2 pages long and completely factual. Daniel read it over twice, made minor edits, then saved it to bring to Wednesday's interview. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos. Thank you for being honest in the meeting today. I've been scared to speak up for years. Seeing you do it helped. Daniel replied, Thank you for speaking up too. We're stronger together. Another text came through, this one from David. Beer sometime? Would be good to talk to someone who gets it. Daniel smiled and typed back. Coffee works better for my schedule, but yes, let's plan something. The connections forming surprised him. He'd worked at Morrison for 6 years and had kept largely to himself, focused on his work and his daughter and the narrow parameters of survival. Now people were reaching out, building community around shared experience and common purpose. Maybe this was what Elena Morrison meant by changing culture. Not just policies on paper, but actual relationships between people who understood each other's struggles. Tuesday brought routine work and a quiet shift that Daniel appreciated after Monday's intensity. Wednesday morning arrived with the scheduled interview with Morrison's compliance team, 2 investigators who met him in a conference room with recording equipment and serious expressions. They asked detailed questions about his experience with Richard Vance. about the accommodation requests and the denials, about the warnings and the final termination. Daniel answered honestly, referring to his written statement, providing dates and documentation where he could. "Did you ever witness Mr. Vance denying accommodation requests to other employees?" the lead investigator asked. "Not directly, but I heard other people talking about it in the break room. Frustrated conversations about requests that got shut down without real consideration." Daniel thought back. Jake Martinez mentioned trying to get schedule flexibility for night classes. Maria Santos talked about being told that everyone has childcare issues when she requested early release twice a month for her daughter's therapy appointments. "Did Mr. Vance ever explicitly tell you not to file complaints or appeals?" "He said that appealing his decisions would be noted in my file, and that the company valued employees who were team players who worked within the system." Daniel met the investigator's eyes. It wasn't a direct threat, but the implication was clear. Don't make waves or face consequences. The interview lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, the lead investigator shook Daniel's hand and said, "Thank you for your candor. This will be helpful in our review." Daniel returned to work feeling drained but lighter, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying without realizing its mass. Speaking the truth, just stating what had happened without drama or exaggeration, felt like taking back power he'd given away through silence. Thursday brought Emma's regular checkup with her pediatrician, an appointment Daniel had scheduled during his lunch break using the temporary accommodation process Jennifer had mentioned. He submitted the request through the online portal at 10 a.m. and had approval by 10:15. The difference from the old system was staggering. Dr. Patel pronounced Emma healthy, her asthma well controlled with current medications, her growth tracking perfectly on the charts. "You're doing a great job," the doctor told Daniel as Emma changed back into her school clothes. "I know single parenting isn't easy, especially with a chronic condition to manage, but Emma's thriving." "Thank you. I'm trying." "You're succeeding. Don't sell yourself short." Dr. Patel made notes in Emma's chart. "Continue current medications, follow up in 6 months unless she has any acute episodes. And Daniel, take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Daniel drove Emma back to school for the afternoon session, watching her skip into the building with her backpack bouncing, completely unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything just a week ago. That innocence, that security, was worth every sacrifice, every difficult choice, every moment of fear. Friday's shift ended with Jake inviting several people from quality control out for drinks after work. Daniel begged off. Emma had a school project due Monday and needed help building a diorama about animal habitats, but promised to join them next time. "You're always welcome," Jake said. "You're kind of a legend around here now, you know." "A legend? For what?" "For standing up to Vance, for getting the CEO to actually change things, for proving that doing the right thing sometimes works out," Jake grinned. "Plus, you're the only person who's ever had Elena Morrison personally walk onto the floor just to talk to them. That's iconic." Daniel shook his head, embarrassed. "I just helped her fix her car." "Yeah, and she helped you get your life back. Seems like a fair trade to me." The weekend was consumed by Emma's habitat diorama. A shoebox transformed into a desert ecosystem, complete with sand, tiny cacti made from pipe cleaners, and a lizard crafted from clay. They worked together at the kitchen table Saturday afternoon, Emma directing the design with the seriousness of an architect, Daniel following instructions and trying not to get glue on everything. "This needs to look real," Emma insisted, carefully painting a background sky on the inside of the box lid. Mrs. Rodriguez said the best projects show understanding of the actual environment, not just random decorations. "You've definitely got the understanding part covered. You've been reading about deserts for 2 weeks. "Because deserts are interesting, Daddy. Did you know some deserts get almost no rain for years? And the animals have to adapt to survive with very little water? That's amazing." Daniel watched his daughter paint careful clouds, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, and felt overwhelming gratitude for this moment. This normal, beautiful, unremarkable Saturday afternoon where the biggest stress was getting a school project done well. They finished the diorama by evening, Emma declaring it perfect with satisfaction that made Daniel's chest swell with pride. They celebrated with pizza, the good kind from the local place, not frozen, and a movie Emma had been wanting to watch. Sunday brought laundry and meal prep and the quiet domestic tasks that defined weekends. Daniel made a big batch of chili for the week, portioned it into containers, and felt the particular satisfaction of being organized and prepared. Mrs. Chen stopped by with fresh vegetables from her garden that somehow still produced in November, and stayed for tea while Emma showed her the completed diorama. "Beautiful work," Mrs. Chen said, examining the desert scene with genuine interest. "You're going to get an A for sure." "I hope so. I worked really hard on it." "Hard work pays off, sweetie. Your daddy knows that, don't you, Daniel?" Daniel met her knowing eyes and smiled. "I'm learning it, yeah." Monday morning, Emma carried her diorama to school with the careful pride of someone presenting important work. Daniel took a photo of her standing on the front steps holding the shoebox, her smile bright and confident, and sent it to his mother in Florida with the caption, "Fourth grade habitat project. She did 90% herself." His mother replied immediately, "She looks just like Sarah. So proud of both of you." The text hit harder than Daniel expected. He sat in the school parking lot for a moment after Emma disappeared into the building, blinking against unexpected tears. His mother had been supportive from a distance. Phone calls every week, cards for Emma, offers to visit that Daniel always postponed because he didn't want her to see how much he was struggling. Maybe it was time to accept one of those offers. Daniel drove to work thinking about his mother, about family connections he'd let weaken through shame and pride, about the support system he'd been too stubborn to fully utilize. Maybe that was another change Elena Morrison had started, not just in company policy, but in his own willingness to accept help, to admit vulnerability, to trust that needing support wasn't the same as failing. The morning passed in steady work until Jennifer Reyes appeared at his workstation at 11 a.m. "Daniel, do you have a few minutes?" His stomach clenched with automatic anxiety. Being summoned by HR was never completely comfortable, even now. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Elena wanted to give you an update on the investigation and the policy development. Can you come up to her office?" Daniel followed Jennifer to the executive building, his mind spinning through possibilities. The investigation had been ongoing for a week. The policy work was progressing, but Elena Morrison didn't typically summon employees for routine updates. Elena's office door was open. She looked up as they entered and gestured to the chairs. "Daniel, thank you for coming up. I wanted to brief you personally on where things stand." "Okay." Daniel sat carefully, trying to read her expression. "First, the investigation into Richard Vance's management practices concluded this morning. The findings are extensive and troubling. Over 3 years, he denied 28 accommodation requests without proper review, created a hostile work environment through intimidation tactics, and actively discouraged employees from using official complaint channels." Elena's voice was professionally neutral, but Daniel could hear the anger underneath. "He's been terminated for cause, effective immediately." Daniel absorbed the news. He'd expected consequences, but termination felt significant, final in a way that made the reality of change concrete. Second, the policy development is moving faster than anticipated. Legal review is complete, and we're ready to move to implementation phase. We'll begin mandatory manager training next week with full policy rollout in 30 days instead of 90. That's faster than you thought possible. It turns out when the CEO makes something a priority, other things move quickly. Elena's expression softened slightly. "I also wanted to tell you that several employees have reached out to HR specifically mentioning your input in the policy meetings. They're grateful to have someone from the floor contributing to development. I'm just one person sharing one perspective. You're the person who proved the system was broken and then helped fix it. That matters, Daniel." Elena paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "I have a question for you, and I want you to feel completely free to say no." Daniel's anxiety spiked. "Okay. I'm planning to announce the new policy at the quarterly company meeting next month. These meetings are usually boring presentations about production numbers and safety updates. I want this one to be different. I want people to understand why we're changing and what it means." Elena leaned forward. "I'd like you to speak. Nothing long, maybe 5 minutes. Just your story. What happened? Why the old system failed you? How the new one would have made a difference." Daniel's first instinct was immediate refusal. Public speaking in front of 300 coworkers about the most difficult period of his life? Absolutely not. But then he thought about Maria's text. Seeing you do it helped, and David's comment about needing cultural change, not just policy change. You want me to talk about being fired? I want you to talk about being a single parent trying to do right by your daughter and your employer, and how the system made that impossible. I want people to understand that this isn't abstract policy. It's about real lives. Elena's expression was earnest. But only if you're comfortable. No pressure, no consequences if you decline. I'm asking, not requiring. Daniel thought about Emma, about the kind of workplace he wanted her to grow up and work in someday, about the other parents on the floor who were still struggling in silence. Can I think about it? Of course, take your time. The meeting isn't for 3 weeks. Daniel returned to the floor with his mind churning. The idea of public speaking terrified him. He'd always been private, careful, someone who kept his head down and did his work. Standing in front of hundreds of people and exposing his vulnerability felt impossible. But impossible things had been happening a lot lately. He worked through lunch, processing the morning's information, and by mid-afternoon had made his decision. Daniel pulled out his phone and texted Elena. I'll speak at the meeting, but I might need help figuring out what to say. Her response came within minutes. You know what to say, just tell the truth. That's always enough. The truth. Daniel could do truth. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a blank document and started writing what would become his speech. He wrote about the morning Emma had her worst asthma attack, about racing to the emergency room and calling work from the hospital, about the warning he'd received later that week. He wrote about the impossible choice between his daughter's health and his job security. He wrote about Sarah, about the lessons she'd taught him, about stopping to help Elena on Route 47. He wrote about what the new policy would have meant, the ability to respond to emergencies without fear, the trust that his commitment to his work would be recognized, even when family had to come first, the security of knowing that being a good father and a good employee weren't mutually exclusive. By the time he finished the first draft, it was past midnight and he'd written far more than 5 minutes worth. But the core was there, honest, raw, true. Over the next week, Daniel refined the speech during lunch breaks and evening hours after Emma slept. He practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, feeling ridiculous, but forcing himself to get comfortable with the words. He timed it, 6 minutes on the long version, 4.5 on the tight version, and worked on making eye contact instead of reading directly from his notes. Emma caught him practicing one evening and demanded to know what he was doing. I have to give a speech at work, just want to make sure I don't mess it up. What's it about? Daniel hesitated, then decided honesty was better than evasion. It's about you, actually, about being your dad and making sure I can take care of you and work at the same time. Emma climbed onto the couch beside him. Can I hear it? It's kind of boring. Daddy, nothing about you is boring. Can I hear it? So Daniel read her the speech, the edited, appropriate for 8-year-olds version, and watched her face as he talked about her asthma, about the hospital visits, about the fear of losing his job, and what that would mean for both of them. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You should tell them the part about Mama teaching you to stop and help people. That's the most important part. You think so? I know so. Because that's why everything got better, right? Because you did what Mama taught you. Daniel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. You're pretty smart, you know that? I learned from the best, Emma said, echoing words he'd said to her countless times. The quarterly company meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the warehouse that had been cleared and set up with chairs, a podium, and a projection screen. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early, his speech notes folded in his pocket, his hands sweating despite the cool November air. The warehouse filled quickly, manufacturing floor workers in their standard uniforms, office staff in business casual, managers and supervisors, and people from every department Daniel had never interacted with. 300 people finding seats, chatting with coworkers, completely unaware that the quiet guy from quality control was about to bare his soul in front of all of them. Elena took the podium at 2 p.m. sharp, looking professional and composed, despite being visibly pregnant now, her presence commanding immediate attention. Thank you all for being here. I know these quarterly meetings are usually pretty dry, production numbers, safety statistics, operational updates. Today's going to be different. Elena's voice carried clearly through the warehouse. Today we're going to talk about why this company exists and what we stand for. Not the mission statement on our website, but the actual values we live by every day. She clicked to the first slide, a photo of Morrison Manufacturing Solutions from 15 years ago, the original warehouse location with just a handful of employees. I started this company because I believed business could be different, that you could build something profitable while treating people with dignity and respect, that good employment practices and good business weren't contradictory goals. Elena paused, looking out at the assembled employees. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. Not completely, but enough that people were suffering in ways I didn't know about because the systems we'd built to help them were being used to hurt them instead. The room was completely silent. 300 people paying attention in a way they probably hadn't at previous quarterly meetings. 3 weeks ago, I was driving to a prenatal appointment when my car broke down on Route 47. I was alone, scared, and starting to panic when a man pulled over to help me. He fixed my car, refused any payment, and got back on the road, knowing he was already late for a work meeting. Elena's voice strengthened. That man was Daniel Reed from our quality control department. The meeting he was late for was his termination hearing. Daniel felt every eye in the warehouse turn toward him. His face heated, but he kept his gaze forward, focused on Elena. Daniel lost his job that day because he stopped to help a stranger, because his values, the values his late wife taught him, the values he's teaching his daughter, told him that helping people mattered more than being on time. Elena let that sit for a moment. I reinstated him the next day, but more importantly, I started investigating why someone with his work record and his integrity was in a position where family emergencies cost him his job in the first place. She clicked to the next slide, a summary of the investigation findings, redacted but clear in its implications. What I found was a systemic failure of management at multiple levels. Supervisors denying legitimate accommodation requests, employees being punished for having family responsibilities. A culture where asking for help was seen as weakness instead of a normal part of being human. Elena's voice hardened. That ends today. The next slide outlined the new flexible scheduling policy, emergency protocols, accommodation processes, accountability measures. Starting next month, Morrison Manufacturing Solutions will have the most comprehensive family accommodation policy of any manufacturer in the region. We're doing this because it's right, and because our employees deserve better than what we've given them. Elena looked out at the crowd. But policy is just words on paper, unless we all commit to making it real. Which is why I've asked Daniel Reed to share his story with you, to help you understand why this matters and what we're trying to build together. Elena stepped back from the podium and gestured to Daniel. This was it. No backing out now. Daniel stood on shaking legs and walked to the front of the warehouse, 300 faces watching him, his prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate and overwhelming. He pulled out his notes, unfolded them, and looked at his own handwriting. Then he looked up at the crowd and set the notes aside. I'm not good at public speaking, Daniel said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. And I'm really not comfortable talking about personal stuff in front of this many people. But Ms. Morrison asked me to tell you the truth about what happened, so here it is. He took a breath and found his footing. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died. She had cancer, and she fought it as long as she could, but eventually she lost that fight. She left me with our daughter Emma, who was 5 at the time, and who has asthma, chronic, sometimes severe asthma that means hospital visits and emergency medications and constant vigilance. Daniel's voice steadied as he talked. I've been trying ever since to be the father Sarah would want me to be and the employee this company deserved. Most days I managed both. Some days I had to choose. He could see people leaning forward, listening intently. When Emma had emergencies, I requested accommodation through the proper channels. Flexible start times so I could handle morning medication routines. Permission to leave if the school called with an asthma attack. Basic stuff that would let me do my job and take care of my daughter. Daniel met eyes with several people in the crowd. Every request was denied. I was told everyone has problems, that company policy doesn't make exceptions, that I needed to find better childcare solutions. He saw heads nodding, recognition in faces throughout the warehouse. 3 weeks ago, Emma's school called. She was having trouble breathing, needed her emergency inhaler, and I was the only one who could get to her. I left work to take care of my daughter, and I was fired for it the next day. Daniel's voice didn't waver. That should never happen. Not to me, not to anyone. No parent should have to choose between their child's health and their job security. The warehouse was completely silent now. The day I was fired, I was driving to that meeting when I saw Ms. Morrison stranded on the road. Her car had broken down, and she was alone and pregnant and clearly needed help. I knew stopping would make me even later. I knew it would probably seal my fate. But my wife taught me and our daughter that you stop when people need help. You help because it's right, not because it's convenient. Daniel found Elena in the crowd and held her gaze. So I stopped. I fixed her car, and I lost my job. He turned back to the assembled employees. Ms. Morrison gave me my job back. More than that, she started investigating why someone like me, someone with good performance reviews and legitimate family needs, was in that position in the first place. What she found was a broken system that punished people for being human. Daniel straightened his shoulders. The new policy we're implementing isn't charity. It's recognition that we're all people with lives outside these walls, with families who need us, with responsibilities that don't disappear just because we clock in. He could feel the emotion rising in his chest and forced himself to push through. I'm standing here because one act of decency changed everything, because someone saw past policy to the person behind it, because a company decided its values mattered more than rigid compliance. Daniel looked around the room. I'm asking all of you to be part of making this real, to support your coworkers when they need accommodation, to speak up when you see the system failing, to remember that we're building something better than what we had. His voice caught slightly on the last words. My daughter Emma is 8 years old. Someday she's going to work somewhere, and I want her to work for people who understand that being a good employee and being a good person aren't separate things. I want her to work in a place where asking for help isn't weakness, where family emergencies are met with support instead of punishment, where doing the right thing doesn't cost you everything. Daniel met Elena's eyes again. Thank you, Miss Morrison, for seeing that possibility, and thank you all for listening. He stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding, his hands shaking again. The warehouse was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire warehouse was applauding. Not polite corporate applause, but genuine appreciation that filled the space and echoed off the metal walls. Daniel stood there overwhelmed, trying to process the response, until Elena stepped forward and shook his hand with a smile that told him he'd done exactly what she'd hoped. The meeting continued with policy details and implementation timelines, but Daniel barely heard it. He returned to his seat in a daze, aware of people nodding at him, meeting his eyes with understanding and gratitude. After the meeting ended, at least 20 people approached him, coworkers he'd worked with for years but never really talked to, people from other departments he'd never met, all sharing their own stories of denied requests and impossible choices and gratitude that change was finally coming. Maria Santos hugged him with tears in her eyes. Thank you for being brave enough to say it, for all of us. David Kim shook his hand firmly. My wife wanted me to tell you thank you. She said maybe other people's spouses won't have to hear them come home defeated anymore. Jake just grinned and said, legendary, man. Absolutely legendary. Daniel drove home that afternoon feeling emotionally wrung out but lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a story that needed telling and had finally set it down. He picked up Emma from after-school care and took her for ice cream even though it was a Friday, because some moments deserved celebration. How was your speech? Emma asked around a mouthful of chocolate chip. Scary, but good, I think. People seem to appreciate it. Did you tell them about Mama? I did. About how she taught us to help people. Emma nodded seriously. Good. That's the important part. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but thank you. You gave people permission to hope things could be better. That matters more than you know. Daniel replied, thank you for making it possible, and for stopping when you needed help too. Her response came quickly. We all need help sometimes. The trick is building systems that recognize that instead of punishing it. Daniel set his phone aside and looked around his small living room. The couch that sagged in the middle, the coffee table Emma had drawn on when she was 6, The framed photos of Sarah that he'd finally been able to look at without his chest tightening quite so much. Home. Secure. Enough. And maybe, finally, the beginning of something better. Not just for him, but for everyone who'd been struggling in silence, afraid to ask for help, convinced that survival meant choosing between the people you loved and the work that sustained you. Maybe doing the right thing really could change the system after all. The weekend after the company meeting brought an unexpected flood of messages, emails from coworkers Daniel had never spoken to, texts from people in departments he didn't even know existed, even a handwritten note that appeared in his work mailbox Monday morning from someone in packaging thanking him for giving voice to struggles they'd faced in silence for years. Daniel read each one with a mixture of gratitude and discomfort, unused to being the center of attention, uncertain how to respond to praise for simply telling the truth. "You're famous now, Shah," Jake said Monday morning, grinning as Daniel settled into his workstation. "I heard people in the break room talking about your speech. Someone called you the guy who changed everything." "I didn't change anything. Miss Morrison did." "You gave her the reason to. There's a difference." Jake pulled up his own work cue. "Also, you made half the women in accounting cry, according to Maria." "In a good way," she said, "but still, powerful stuff." Daniel shook his head and focused on his inspection reports, trying to return to the comfortable anonymity of quality control work. But the attention didn't fade as quickly as he'd hoped. People nodded to him in hallways. The new acting supervisor in Vance's former position stopped by his station to introduce himself properly and thank Daniel for his courage. Even the executive assistant who managed Elena's calendar smiled at him warmly when he passed her in the building lobby. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable, and made Daniel want to hide in his workstation until everyone forgot about the speech and went back to seeing him as just another guy doing his job. But something had shifted, and there was no going back to invisible. Wednesday brought the first mandatory manager training session on the new flexible scheduling policy. Daniel wasn't required to attend. The training was designed for supervisory staff. But Jennifer Reyes had asked if he'd be willing to participate in the Q&A portion to answer questions from a frontline employee perspective. Daniel agreed, though standing in front of 40 managers felt almost as intimidating as the company-wide meeting had been. The training room was packed, managers from every department filling chairs and taking notes as Jennifer walked through the policy details. Emergency protocols, documentation requirements, accommodation request processes, accountability measures. She presented it all with clear authority, making it evident that this wasn't optional or subject to individual interpretation. It was company policy, backed by the CEO, non-negotiable. "Now I'd like to bring up Daniel Reed from Quality Control," Jennifer said 90 minutes into the session. "Many of you heard his speech at the quarterly meeting. He's here to answer questions about what the old system felt like from an employee perspective and how the new policy addresses those gaps." Daniel stood and moved to the front of the room, hyper-aware of every manager's eyes on him. Some faces were familiar, supervisors he'd worked under over the years, people who'd been kind or neutral or dismissive. Others were complete strangers from departments he'd never interacted with. A woman in her 50s raised her hand first. "I manage the packaging line. We run on tight schedules with minimal staff. How am I supposed to accommodate emergency departures without disrupting production?" Daniel took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I think that's the wrong question, ma'am. The question isn't how to avoid disruption. Emergencies are disruptive by nature. The question is how to build enough flexibility into your scheduling that one person leaving for an emergency doesn't collapse the entire operation." The woman's expression shifted, defensive to thoughtful. "You're saying the problem is how I schedule, not the emergency itself." "I'm saying that if your operation can't function when one person has a family crisis, the vulnerability isn't the person, it's the system." Daniel met her eyes steadily. "In quality control, we cross-train people specifically so we have coverage when someone's out. It's not perfect, but it means we're not constantly one emergency away from failure." A younger man spoke up from the back. "What about people who might abuse the system, call in emergencies that aren't really emergencies?" "Then you document and address it individually, same as you would any other performance issue." Daniel kept his voice even. "But you don't build policy around the assumption that people are lying. You build it around the reality that most people are trying to do right by their families and their jobs, and sometimes those responsibilities conflict in ways they can't control." But how do we verify documentation after the fact? Jennifer interjected. We covered this in the policy section. Employees provide verification within 48 hours. Medical records, school communications, whatever demonstrates the emergency was legitimate. If someone can't or won't provide documentation, that triggers a conversation. But verification comes after trust, not before. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, managers working through scenarios and edge cases, trying to understand how to implement policy that required them to lead with trust instead of suspicion. Daniel answered what he could, deferred to Jennifer when questions became too technical or policy-specific, and tried to help people understand what it felt like to be on the other side of denied accommodation requests. A man Daniel recognized from the logistics department raised his hand near the end. I have to be honest. This feels like we're being told our judgment doesn't matter, that we have to say yes to everything or face investigation. Daniel met his eyes. With respect, sir, this policy exists because too many managers were saying no to everything and using judgment to justify denying legitimate requests. If your judgment is sound and you're actually considering each request on its merits, this policy protects you. It provides clear guidelines so you're not making decisions in a vacuum. But if your judgment has been to automatically deny accommodation because it's inconvenient or because everyone has problems, then yeah, this policy is absolutely questioning that judgment. The room went very quiet. The logistics manager's face reddened, but he nodded slowly. Fair enough. After the training ended, several managers approached Daniel privately. Some thanked him for his perspective. Others admitted they hadn't realized how their decisions affected employees' lives beyond work. One older supervisor from manufacturing pulled Daniel aside and said quietly, I denied your accommodation request 2 years ago. You'd asked for flexibility when your daughter had that bad pneumonia spell. I didn't think it through, just followed Vance's lead on keeping things tight. I'm sorry, I should have done better. Daniel didn't remember the specific request, but he remembered that winter when Emma had been sick for weeks, and he'd been constantly stressed about work coverage. Thank you for saying that. And for being here, learning how to do it differently. I've got a grandson with diabetes. My daughter's been struggling to keep her job while managing his care. The supervisor's voice was rough. Your speech made me realize I've been part of the problem, even for my own family. That changes now. Walking back to his station after the training, Daniel felt the weight of what Elena was attempting to do. Changing policy was relatively simple. Write new rules, distribute the handbook, require compliance. Changing culture meant changing how hundreds of people thought about their responsibilities, how they balanced operational needs with human complexity, how they led with trust instead of control. It was ambitious and difficult and absolutely necessary. That evening, Daniel picked up Emma from after-school care and found her unusually quiet in the car, staring out the window with the distant expression that usually meant something was bothering her. Everything okay, Em? Can I ask you something? Always. At school today, Mrs. Rodriguez asked us to write about someone we admire. I wrote about you. Emma's voice was small, uncertain. But then Tommy said his dad is a police officer who saves people, and Sophia's mom is a doctor who helps sick people, and I started thinking maybe fixing cars and working in a factory isn't as important as those jobs. Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled into a grocery store parking lot and turned to face his daughter fully. Emma, look at me. She met his eyes, hers shining with unshed tears. Every job is important if you do it with integrity. Police officers and doctors do amazing work, absolutely. But so do the people who make sure the components and medical equipment are safe and functional. So do the people who stop to help strangers even when it costs them something. So do the parents who show up every day for their kids, no matter how hard it gets. Daniel reached out and brushed hair from her face. I'm not saving lives in an emergency room or catching criminals, but I'm making sure the products we manufacture are safe and reliable. I'm helping build better policies so other parents don't have to choose between their kids and their jobs. And most importantly, I'm raising you to understand that character matters more than career titles. But you got fired, Daddy. Tommy's dad said people who get fired did something wrong. Daniel took a slow breath, processing the sting of judgment from someone who didn't know their story, trying to find words that would help Emma understand nuance that adults struggled with. I got fired for leaving work to take care of you when you needed me. Some people think that's wrong, that work should always come first. But I think taking care of you was exactly right, even though it cost me my job. He held her gaze. Tommy's dad probably does important work. But if he thinks losing your job for taking care of your child means you did something wrong, then he doesn't understand what being a parent means. Miss Morrison understood. Yes, she did, because she values people over policies, and she knows that sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled Emma into a hug. I am so proud to be your dad, and I don't need a fancy job title to know that what I do matters. I matter because of how I treat people, how I show up for you, how I live the values your mom taught us both. Emma hugged him back fiercely. I'm proud you're my dad too, and I'm keeping my essay the way it is. Good. Now, how about we get something special for dinner? Maybe those dumplings you like from the Chinese place? The mention of dumplings brightened Emma's expression immediately, and the heaviness of the conversation lifted as they debated between dumplings and spring rolls, and whether they could afford to get both. They could. Daniel was learning to recognize when Emma needed small celebrations, when spending a few extra dollars on her favorite foods mattered more than rigid budgeting. They were going to be okay financially. The back pay had come through, his regular paychecks were secure, and the constant fear of financial disaster had finally loosened its grip. Over dinner at their kitchen table, Emma told him about her day in exhaustive detail. The math quiz she'd aced, the argument on the playground about whether cats or dogs were better pets, the art project they'd started about community helpers. Normal, wonderful, mundane pieces of childhood that Daniel had learned to treasure. His phone rang as they were finishing dinner. Elena Morrison's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, Em. Can you start your homework? Emma nodded and headed to the living room with her backpack while Daniel answered. Miss Morrison, hi. Is everything okay? I'm sorry to call during dinner, Daniel. Do you have a few minutes? Elena's voice carried an undertone of stress that immediately put Daniel on alert. Of course. What's going on? I'm at the hospital. Nothing urgent, just monitoring. The pregnancy is high risk and my blood pressure spiked this afternoon, so my doctor insisted I come in for observation. Elena spoke quickly, professionally, but Daniel could hear the worry underneath. I'm fine. The baby's fine, but I'm likely going to be here overnight and I need to make some calls about work coverage tomorrow. Jennifer can handle most of it, but there's a client meeting at 9 that I really should be at. What can I do to help? Actually, I was calling to give you a heads up. The client is Patterson Industries. They're one of our biggest accounts. We're presenting the new quality control protocols, and I'd originally planned to walk them through our inspection process personally. Elena paused. Jennifer can do the presentation, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to be there as the QC expert, answer technical questions, demonstrate the process, show them our actual standards in practice. Daniel's immediate reaction was panic. He was quality control floor staff, not someone who interfaced with major clients, but he pushed it down. You want me to meet with Patterson Industries? I want them to meet the person who ensures their components are manufactured to the highest standards. You know the process better than I do at this point. You can speak to the work with authority I can't match. Elena's voice softened slightly. I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you could handle it, and honestly, after your speech last week, I think you're better at communicating complex ideas than you give yourself credit for. What time tomorrow? 9 a.m., Conference Room A in the Executive Building. Jennifer will brief you at 8:30. Relief colored Elena's tone. Thank you, Daniel. Really? It's not a problem. And Miss Morrison, take care of yourself and the baby. The company can survive one client meeting without you. I'm learning that slowly. Elena's laugh was tired but genuine. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. After ending the call, Daniel sat at the kitchen table trying to process what he'd just agreed to. A client meeting with Patterson Industries, a company that supplied components to automotive manufacturers across 3 states that represented at least 20% of Morrison's annual revenue, that could make or break the company's growth trajectory. And he'd just volunteered to be the quality control expert. Daddy? Emma appeared in the doorway. Who was that? My boss. She needs me to help with a big meeting tomorrow. Are you nervous? Terrified, honestly. Emma climbed into the chair beside him. You'll be good at it. You're always good at your job. This is different from my regular job, Em. This is talking to important people about technical stuff. But you know the technical stuff. You know it better than anyone. Emma spoke with the absolute certainty of a child who believed her father could do anything. Just tell them the truth like you did at the company meeting. That worked really well. Daniel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Emma said, repeating his words back to him again. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel pulled out his laptop and reviewed everything he knew about Patterson Industries and their component requirements. He studied inspection protocols, quality metrics, defect rates, everything that might come up in technical discussions. He drafted notes about Morrison's process improvements, the streamlined inspection systems he'd helped develop, the 0.3% error rate that set their quality control apart from competitors. By midnight, Daniel had filled a notebook with information and talking points and felt marginally more prepared. He set his alarm for 5:30 a.m., early enough to review everything again before getting Emma ready for school, and tried to sleep despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. Morning arrived too quickly. Daniel went through the motions of breakfast and backpack checks and drop-off on autopilot, his mind already racing through potential questions and how he'd answer them. He arrived at Morrison Manufacturing Solutions at 8:15 a.m., giving himself extra time to settle his nerves. Jennifer met him in the lobby at 8:30 sharp, carrying a folder and projector remote. Morning, Daniel. Ready for this? Not remotely, but I'm here. Elena called me last night from the hospital. She's staying through today at least, but she said you'd do great. Jennifer led him toward the conference room. Patterson's sending their VP of Operations and their Senior Quality Engineer. They're detail-oriented and direct, but they're fair. Just be yourself and answer honestly. If you don't know something, say so. They respect that more than bluffing. Conference Room A was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the industrial park, a massive table that could seat 20 people, presentation equipment that looked like it cost more than Daniel's car. Jennifer set up her laptop and ran through the presentation slides while Daniel reviewed his notes one more time. At 8:55 a.m., the receptionist called up to say Patterson's representatives had arrived. Daniel's hands started sweating. Two people entered the conference room at 9 o'clock exactly. A woman in her early 50s wearing a sharp business suit and a younger man carrying a leather portfolio. Professional, confident, the kind of people who evaluated companies for a living and could spot weaknesses instantly. Jennifer handled introductions smoothly. Margaret Chen, VP of Operations, and James Walsh, Senior Quality Engineer. This is Jennifer Reyes, our Director of HR, and Daniel Reed, our Lead Quality Control Specialist. Lead Quality Control Specialist. Daniel had never had that title, but he appreciated Jennifer giving him credibility he hadn't known he possessed. Margaret shook his hand with a firm grip. Mr. Reed, pleasure to meet you. Elena speaks very highly of your work. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity to walk you through our processes. They settled around the conference table, Jennifer pulling up the first presentation slide. She walked through Morrison's quality control overview, the statistical metrics that demonstrated their reliability, the improvements they'd implemented over the past year. Margaret and James took notes, asked clarifying questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the data. 15 minutes into the presentation, James interrupted. These defect rates are impressive. What's your inspection protocol for the X47 component specifically? That's one of our highest volume parts. Jennifer glanced at Daniel, yielding the floor. This was it. Daniel's moment to either prove he belonged in this meeting or confirm he was out of his depth. He took a breath and leaned forward. The X47 requires a 3-stage inspection process. Initial visual inspection immediately post-manufacturing to catch obvious defects, surface irregularities, dimensional issues, anything that fails basic standards. Components that pass move to precision measurement using calibrated micrometers and digital gauges, checking tolerances to within 0.05 millimeters. Final stage is functional testing under simulated operational stress. James made notes. What's your sample rate? 100% on the X47. It's a critical component with zero tolerance for failure, so we inspect every single unit rather than statistical sampling. Daniel pulled out his notebook, finding the data he'd reviewed last night. Over the past 6 months, our initial detection rate is 97.2%, meaning we catch defects before they move through the system. The remaining 2.8% are identified in precision measurement or functional testing. Nothing defective reaches packaging. That's significantly better than industry standard. Margaret looked genuinely impressed. How do you maintain consistency across shifts and inspectors? Standardized checklists, mandatory calibration verification at shift start, and cross-training so every inspector understands not just what to look for, but why it matters. Daniel felt his confidence growing as he talked about work he knew intimately. We also do random quality audits where supervisors re-inspect components that already passed. Keeps everyone sharp and ensures standards don't drift over time. The meeting continued for another hour, Jennifer handling business and contract details, while Daniel fielded every technical question about inspection processes, quality metrics, defect prevention, and continuous improvement initiatives. Margaret and James were thorough but fair, their questions probing but not hostile. By 10:30 a.m., Margaret was smiling. This has been extremely informative. I have to say, Mr. Reed, your knowledge of these processes and your ability to articulate them clearly is exactly what we look for in partners. Quality control is only as good as the people implementing it, and it's obvious Morrison has exceptional people. Thank you, ma'am. I take a lot of pride in the work. It shows. Margaret stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. Jennifer, we'll finalize the contract details by end of week. James will send over our technical specifications for the new components, and I'd like Mr. Reed to review them if possible. His input on inspection protocols would be valuable. Daniel blinked. You want my input on your specifications? We want to make sure what we're designing is actually inspectable to the standards you've described. Your perspective would help us build better components from the start. Margaret extended her hand again. Thank you both for your time. Please give Elena our best wishes for her health. After Margaret and James left, Jennifer turned to Daniel with undisguised delight. That was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Margaret Chen is notoriously hard to impress, and you had her taking notes on your processes. I just answered questions. You did more than that. You represented this company like someone who's been doing client relations for years. Jennifer started packing up her laptop. Elena's going to be thrilled when I tell her how well this went. Daniel helped clean up the conference room, still processing what had just happened. He'd walked into that meeting terrified and walked out having apparently impressed one of Morrison's most important clients. More than that, they wanted his input on component design, recognition that his expertise mattered beyond the manufacturing floor. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Jennifer says you were brilliant. Thank you for stepping up. I knew you could do it. Daniel replied, just told them what I know. How are you feeling? Bored and frustrated, but stable. Should be released tomorrow. Take the rest of the day to recover from the meeting. You earned it. Daniel smiled and pocketed his phone. He returned to his workstation to find Jake waiting with raised eyebrows. Dude, you just spent 90 minutes in a meeting with Patterson Industries' executive team. What the hell? Elena's in the hospital. They needed someone to handle the QC portion of a client meeting, and apparently I was that someone. And I think it went okay. They asked a lot of questions, I answered them, and they seemed satisfied. Daniel logged into his workstation, trying to return to normal. Now I've got about 4 hours of inspection backlog to catch up on. You're not even going to brag a little? This is huge, Dan. It was one meeting, Jake. Let's not make it bigger than it was. But throughout the afternoon, people kept stopping by his station. Jennifer checking in to thank him again. Maria from the policy committee congratulating him on representing floor workers in high-level meetings. Even the interim supervisor mentioning he'd heard the Patterson meeting went exceptionally well. Daniel tried to stay focused on his work, inspecting components with the same careful attention he brought every day. But the attention was inescapable. He'd somehow become visible in a company where he'd spent years trying to blend into the background, and visibility brought both opportunity and discomfort. At 4:30 p.m., he clocked out and drove to Emma's school, grateful for the return to routine. Emma bounced into the car full of stories about her day, blissfully unaware that her father had just successfully navigated corporate politics at a level he'd never imagined operating. "How was your big meeting?" Emma asked as they drove home. "Good, actually. Scary at first, but once I started talking about the work, it felt more natural." "I told you you'd be good at it." "You did. I should listen to you more often." Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you want for dinner?" "Can we have breakfast for dinner? Pancakes?" "Pancakes it is." They spent the evening in their kitchen making pancakes shaped like animals, Emma's request, while she told him about the spelling test she'd aced and the book her teacher had started reading to the class. Normal, domestic, perfectly unremarkable in the best possible way. After Emma went to bed, Daniel sat on the couch with his laptop and found an email from James Walsh at Patterson Industries. "Mr. Reed, attached are the preliminary specifications for our new component line. If you have time to review the dimensional tolerances and inspection requirements, I'd appreciate your feedback. Your insights today were valuable, and I'd like to incorporate them into our design process." Daniel opened the attachment, detailed engineering drawings and specifications for components he'd be inspecting once they moved to production. James was asking for his input at the design stage, recognition that quality control wasn't just about catching defects, but about preventing them through better initial design. It was respect he'd never expected, trust he was still learning to accept. Daniel spent an hour reviewing the specifications, making notes about inspection challenges, and suggesting tolerance adjustments that would make quality verification more reliable. He sent his feedback to James with professional courtesy he was developing through practice, then closed his laptop and allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. 1 month ago, he'd been fired for leaving work to care for his daughter. Today, he'd represented his company to a major client and been asked for design input on future products. The change was dizzying, overwhelming, proof that sometimes doing the right thing didn't just save your own situation. It opened doors you hadn't known existed. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from his mother in Florida. "Emma sent me pictures of her animal pancakes. You're doing such a good job with her, honey. Your father and I are so proud of you." His throat tightened. He'd been keeping his mother at arm's length for months, not wanting her to see how much he was struggling, too proud to admit he needed support. But maybe it was time to let her in, to accept that asking for help wasn't weakness. Daniel typed, "Thanks, Mom. I'd love for you to visit sometime soon. I think Emma would really love that." The response came immediately. "I'll book flights this weekend. Can't wait to see you both." Daniel set the phone down and looked around his living room, small, worn, filled with the accumulated memories of 3 years of single parenthood. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was home, and it was secure, and it was enough. More than enough. He thought about Elena in the hospital, about the baby she was carrying alone, about the risk she was taking building a company around principles instead of profit margins. He thought about all the employees who'd approached him after his speech, who'd shared their own stories of struggle and gratitude that someone was finally listening. He thought about Emma sleeping peacefully down the hall, growing up in a world that was slowly, incrementally becoming more humane because people were willing to stand up and say the system was broken. And he thought about Sarah, about the woman who taught him that stopping to help people mattered, that integrity was worth preserving even when it cost you something, that the measure of your life was how you treated people when it was hard. Daniel hoped she'd be proud of what he'd built from the wreckage of her loss. Not just survival, but a life with meaning, with purpose, with proof that decency still mattered in a world that often rewarded the opposite. He hoped she could see that their daughter was growing up understanding those same values, living them naturally because they'd been woven into the fabric of her childhood. He hoped she knew he was finally, tentatively, learning to believe they were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be fine. Daniel's mother arrived on a Friday evening in early December, her rental car pulling up in front of the house just as Emma was setting the table for dinner. Emma shrieked with delight and launched herself off the porch before Daniel could even get the door fully open, wrapping her grandmother in a hug that nearly knocked the older woman off balance. "Grandma, you're really here! Daddy said you were coming, but I didn't believe it until right now." "I'm really here, sweetheart." Catherine Reed held her granddaughter close, and Daniel saw tears in his mother's eyes when she looked up at him over Emma's head. "Hi, honey." "Hi, Mom." Daniel came down the steps and hugged them both, feeling something tight in his chest loosen at the simple comfort of his mother's presence. How was the flight? Long but uneventful, and I'm so happy to be here, I don't even care. Catherine pulled back to study Daniel's face with the assessing look only mothers could manage. You look good. Better than the last time I saw you. That had been 18 months ago. A strained visit where Daniel had been so stressed and exhausted he'd barely been able to maintain conversation. His mother had offered to stay longer, to help more, and Daniel had insisted everything was fine while visibly falling apart. The memory made him wince. I am better. A lot's changed in the past few weeks. Daniel picked up his mother's suitcase. Come on, let's get you settled. Emma's been planning your visit like a military operation. Emma grabbed her grandmother's hand and pulled her toward the house, chattering the entire way about the spare bedroom they'd cleaned, the welcome sign she'd made, the activities she'd planned for the weekend. Catherine followed with patient delight, asking questions and exclaiming over Emma's preparations with genuine enthusiasm. Over dinner, the good lasagna Daniel had actually made from scratch instead of heating from a box. Emma told her grandmother everything. About Daniel getting fired and then getting his job back, about the lady whose car he'd fixed, about the big speech at the company meeting that had made people cry. He was really brave, Grandma. Everyone says so, and now he's helping make better rules so other parents don't have to be scared like Daddy was. Catherine met Daniel's eyes across the table, her expression a mixture of pride and concern, and something that looked like relief. That's quite a story, Daniel. Why didn't you tell me any of this was happening? I didn't want to worry you, and honestly, it all happened so fast I'm still processing it myself. Daniel pushed food around his plate. I'm sorry I didn't call. I should have. You should have. But I understand why you didn't. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, honey, for all of it. For doing the right thing even when it was hard. For standing up and telling your story. For building something better. Your father would be proud too. Daniel's father had passed away 5 years ago, before Sarah's diagnosis, before everything had fallen apart. He'd been a quiet man who'd worked construction his entire life and had taught Daniel that honest work and treating people right mattered more than money or status. Daniel wished desperately that his father could have met Emma, could have seen the kind of person she was becoming. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing her grandmother every drawing she'd made in the past month, every school project, every book she was reading. Catherine settled on the couch and gave Emma her complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and praising genuinely, the kind of grandmothering that Emma had been missing since Sarah's parents had moved to Arizona and visits had become rare. Daniel cleaned the kitchen and watched them together, feeling grateful and guilty in equal measure. His mother had offered to visit countless times, had wanted to be more involved, and Daniel had kept her at distance because he'd been too proud to let her see him struggling. He'd robbed Emma of time with her grandmother and robbed himself of support he desperately needed, all because he'd been trying to prove he could handle everything alone. He was learning, slowly, that handling everything alone wasn't strength. It was just isolation wearing a noble mask. Saturday morning brought breakfast at the diner Emma loved, then a trip to the park where Catherine pushed Emma on the swings and built elaborate stories about the adventures of a princess who could talk to animals. Daniel sat on a bench nearby, watching them play, feeling the particular peace that came from seeing your child happy and secure. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Reyes. Elena was released from the hospital this morning. Baby's doing well. She's on modified bed rest for the next few weeks. She wanted you to know everything's okay. Daniel replied, That's great news. Please tell her I'm thinking of her and the baby. Another text came through, this one from Elena herself. Thank you for handling the Patterson meeting. James Walsh called me yesterday to say you were exactly what they needed. You made Morrison look very good. Daniel smiled and typed, Just did my job. Focus on taking care of yourself and the baby. The company will survive without you for a few weeks. Elena's response came quickly. Learning to delegate is harder than I expected, but you're right. Take care, Daniel. Good news? Catherine had appeared beside the bench, Emma still playing nearby. My boss had a health scare last week. Pregnancy complications. She's home now and doing better. Daniel pocketed his phone. She's the one who gave me my job back, the one whose car I fixed. The CEO? Catherine's eyebrows rose. Emma mentioned that, but I thought maybe she'd gotten the details confused. Nope, Emma had it right. Elena Morrison, founder and CEO, stranded on Route 47 with a broken car and no help coming anytime soon. Daniel shook his head at the improbability of it all. If I'd driven past her that day, none of this would have happened. I'd still be unemployed, probably losing the apartment, definitely stressed out of my mind. But you didn't drive past. You stopped, because that's who you are. Catherine sat beside him on the bench. Sarah chose well when she married you. She knew you'd be the kind of father who'd put Emma first, who'd teach her the right values, who'd do the hard thing because it was right. Daniel's throat tightened. I miss her, Mom. Every day. I miss having someone to share the decisions with, someone who knew Emma as well as I do, someone who could tell me I was doing okay when I felt like I was failing. You're not failing, honey. You're succeeding in ways that matter most. Catherine put her arm around his shoulders, the way she had when he was young and overwhelmed by something he thought was insurmountable. Emma is happy, healthy, kind, and confident. Your work is valued and respected. You've helped change an entire company's culture for the better. That's not failure. That's building a life worth living from circumstances that would have broken a lot of people. Some days it feels like I'm barely holding it together. That's called being human. Nobody has it all together, Daniel. The people who look like they do are just better at hiding the cracks. Catherine squeezed his shoulder. Let me help more. Let me be part of Emma's life in a real way, not just phone calls and birthday cards. I can visit more often, or you two can come to Florida for school breaks. I want to be here for you both. Daniel leaned into his mother's embrace and let himself accept what he'd been refusing for too long. I'd like that. Emma would love that. I'm sorry I kept you at arm's length. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. I understand. But you don't have to protect yourself from people who love you. Catherine kissed the top of his head like he was 8 years old instead of 34. We're family. We show up for each other. That's how this works. They sat together watching Emma play, and Daniel felt another piece of the armor he'd built around himself crack and fall away. He'd been so focused on being strong, on not burdening anyone, on proving he could handle single parenthood alone, that he'd forgotten strength sometimes looked like accepting help, like admitting vulnerability, like letting people who loved you share the weight. The weekend passed in a blur of activities: the Children's Museum, where Emma dragged them through every exhibit twice, ice cream despite the December cold, a movie that made all three of them cry at the ending. Sunday evening arrived too quickly, Catherine's flight scheduled for early Monday morning. I don't want you to go, Emma said at bedtime, clinging to her grandmother with the desperate grip of a child who'd rediscovered something precious. I know, sweetheart, but I'll be back for Christmas, and you and Daddy are going to visit me in Florida for spring break. We'll go to the beach and find shells and maybe see dolphins. Catherine stroked Emma's hair. And we can video call every week. You can show me your drawings and tell me about school. It's not the same as having you here. I know, but it's better than nothing, and we'll make it work. Catherine kissed Emma's forehead. I love you so much, Emma. More than all the stars in the sky. I love you more than all the sand on all the beaches everywhere, Emma whispered back, and Daniel had to leave the room before they saw him crying. Later, after Emma was asleep, Catherine and Daniel sat in the living room with tea, talking quietly about logistics and plans, and the future that felt more hopeful than it had in years. I want to help financially, Catherine said. I know you're proud and you'll say no, but hear me out. Your father left me comfortable when he passed. I don't need much living alone in Florida. Let me set up an education fund for Emma, something for college or whatever she needs down the road. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse, but he caught himself. This wasn't charity. It was a grandmother wanting to invest in her granddaughter's future. Thank you, Mom. That would mean a lot. For Emma. Good. I'll set it up this week. Catherine sipped her tea. And I want to be clear about something, Daniel. You're not doing this alone anymore. You have me. You have your neighbors. You have this community you've built at work. Sarah would want you to accept that support, to let people help carry what's heavy. I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning. That's all anyone can ask, Catherine smiled. Now tell me about this CEO of yours, Elena Morrison. She sounds formidable. She is. Smart, demanding, principled in ways that cost her operationally but make the company better for employees. Daniel thought about Elena in the hospital, managing business from her bed because she couldn't fully let go. She's doing this pregnancy alone, which I think makes her understand single parenting pressures in ways other executives might not. She gets it. You respect her. I do. A lot. She didn't have to reinstate me. She could have just thanked me for helping with her car and let the termination stand. But she saw an injustice and fixed it, even though it meant investigating her own management team and overhauling company policy. That takes courage. Catherine studied him with the knowing look mothers develop. She's lucky to have you representing her company. Don't forget that goes both ways. Morrison is better because you're there. Monday morning came too early. Daniel drove his mother to the airport before dawn, both of them quiet in the pre-sunrise darkness. At the departure curb, Catherine hugged him tight. I'm so proud of you, Daniel, for everything. Be gentle with yourself, okay? You're doing better than you think. I'll try. Thank you for coming, Mom. It meant everything to Emma, to both of us. I'll be back in 3 weeks for Christmas. We'll make it special. She kissed his cheek and grabbed her suitcase. I love you, honey. Love you too, Mom. Daniel drove back through the quiet city streets as the sun started to rise, feeling simultaneously empty from the goodbye and full from the weekend together. He picked up Emma from Mrs. Chen's house. She'd stayed the night so Daniel could do the early airport run, and got her to school with time to spare. Work that week brought the official rollout of the new flexible scheduling policy. Jennifer held department meetings walking through the protocols. Managers received their final training sessions, and every employee got an updated handbook with the policies printed clearly. Daniel watched it happen with quiet satisfaction, seeing ideas he'd contributed become actual company practice, knowing his experience had helped shape something that would benefit hundreds of people. On Wednesday, Maria Santos stopped by his workstation with tears in her eyes. I just submitted my first accommodation request under the new policy. My daughter has a therapy appointment Friday afternoon, and I requested early release. It was approved in 20 minutes, Daniel. 20 minutes. No interrogation, no guilt trip, just approved, have documentation ready Monday. I've been fighting for this for 2 years. I'm glad it worked the way it's supposed to. But it worked because you stood up and said the old way was broken. Don't minimize that. Maria hugged him quickly. Thank you. For all of us who were too scared to speak up. Similar conversations happened throughout the week. Coworkers thanking him, sharing their own successful accommodation requests, expressing relief that the culture of fear was finally changing. Daniel accepted the thanks with grace he was still developing, learning to recognize his role in the transformation without taking all the credit for systemic change that required many people's commitment. Thursday brought an unexpected email from James Walsh at Patterson Industries. Daniel, your feedback on our component specifications was excellent. We've incorporated your tolerance recommendations into the final design. I'd like to schedule a call to discuss potential consulting work. Patterson would pay for your expertise in reviewing our designs before they go to production. Interested? Daniel read the email 3 times, trying to process what James was offering. Consulting work. Being paid for his expertise by one of the industry's major players. Recognition that his knowledge had value beyond Morrison's walls. He forwarded the email to Elena with a note. Is this something I'm allowed to do? I don't want to create a conflict of interest. Elena's response came an hour later. Absolutely allowed. I'd encourage it, actually. Raises Morrison's profile and shows Patterson we have people worth consulting. Let's discuss compensation structure. You should be paid appropriately, and we should formalize this kind of arrangement for future opportunities. That evening, Daniel called James Walsh and discussed the consulting proposal. Nothing extensive, maybe 5 hours a month reviewing designs and providing inspection protocol recommendations, but enough to supplement his income meaningfully and build expertise that would serve his career long term. I really appreciate this opportunity, Mr. Walsh. I have to admit, a month ago I would never have imagined doing this kind of work. A month ago, we didn't know you existed. Elena Morrison made sure we understood that quality control at Morrison wasn't just process. It was people who genuinely cared about the work. James paused. That matters to us. We want partners who take quality seriously at every level, not just in executive presentations. They finalized terms and scheduled the first review session for the following week. Daniel ended the call feeling like his professional life was expanding in directions he'd never anticipated. Opportunities emerging because he'd been willing to be visible, to speak up, to represent the work he did with pride instead of hiding behind anonymity. Friday afternoon brought the news everyone had been waiting for. Elena Morrison sent a company-wide email at 3 p.m. I'm delighted to announce the arrival of my daughter, Sophie Catherine Morrison, born this morning at 6:47 a.m., 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy and already showing signs of her mother's stubbornness. We're both doing well. Thank you for all your support during this pregnancy. I'll be on parental leave for the next 8 weeks. Jennifer Reyes and the management team have everything under control. Take care of each other. Elena Daniel stared at the email, particularly at the baby's middle name, Catherine, his mother's name. It couldn't be coincidence. Elena had chosen it deliberately, a gesture connecting her daughter to the story that had changed Morrison's culture. He forwarded the email to his mother with a note. I think you're going to like this. His mother's response came within minutes. Oh, Daniel, that's beautiful. What a gift. That evening, Daniel stopped at a baby store on the way home and spent far too long selecting the perfect gift. A soft blanket embroidered with Sophie's name and birth date, classic and simple and made to last. He added a card that took him 20 minutes to write, trying to express congratulations and gratitude and connection in a few sentences that didn't sound maudlin. Finally, he settled on, Congratulations on Sophie's arrival. Wishing you both health and joy. Thank you for seeing past one moment to the person behind it. That changed everything. Daniel, Reed, and Emma. He mailed the package Saturday morning, then took Emma to the park where they'd scattered some of Sarah's ashes 3 years ago. They did this sometimes, visited and talked to her, told her about their lives, kept her memory present in ways that felt natural instead of morbid. Mama, guess what? Emma settled on the grass near the memorial bench. Daddy's boss had a baby and they named her Sophie Catherine, and Catherine is Grandma's name, and Daddy says it's because of the story about him helping her. Isn't that cool? Daniel sat beside his daughter and looked at the plaque on the bench. Sarah Catherine Reed, beloved wife and mother, 1988 to 2021. I wish you could have met her, Sarah. I think you two would have been friends. She's got your kind of strength, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself but moves mountains when it needs to. Daddy's doing really good, Mama, Emma continued, talking to the memorial with the easy acceptance of a child who'd grown up understanding death as part of life. He got his job back and he's helping lots of people, and Grandma says he's succeeding in ways that matter most. I think you'd be proud of him. I'm proud of him. Daniel's eyes stung. He wrapped his arm around Emma and held her close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo in the crisp December air. You know what, Em? I think Mama would be proud of you too. You're kind and brave and smart, and you understand things most kids your age don't. That's because of her. She's still teaching you things, even though she's not here. I know. I feel her sometimes, like she's watching and smiling. Emma leaned against Daniel's side. Do you think Ms. Morrison's baby will grow up knowing about you? About how you helped her mama? I don't know, maybe, but that's not why I did it. I know, you did it because that's what people do. That's what Mama taught us. Emma was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you stopped that day, Daddy, even though it was scary, because everything got better after. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. They sat together until the winter sun started setting, then walked back to the car hand in hand. On the drive home, Emma asked if they could make cookies for Mrs. Chen and Daniel agreed, and they spent the evening baking chocolate chip cookies that filled the house with warmth and the sweet smell of home. The following week brought Christmas preparations. A tree from the lot down the street, decorations Emma had made over the years mixed with ornaments that had been Sarah's, light strung with more enthusiasm than precision. Daniel's mother arrived on December 23rd, her suitcase full of wrapped presents, and her presence filling the house with the particular joy that grandmothers brought. Christmas Eve, they went to the community dinner at Emma's school, a potluck where families gathered and kids performed songs, and the gym was transformed into something magical with paper decorations and string lights. Daniel brought Mrs. Chen and her family, introduced his mother to the neighbors and teachers who'd supported them through the hardest years, and felt the strength of community that he'd been too isolated to fully appreciate before. Maria Santos was there with her 3 children, and she pulled Daniel aside to say, "I got a promotion. Floor supervisor position opened up, and I applied using the new accommodation policy to negotiate flexible hours as part of the offer. They said yes, Daniel. They actually said yes." "That's amazing, Maria. You'll be great at it." "I wouldn't have applied before. I would have assumed they'd never accommodate a single mother's schedule. But the culture's changing. People believe the policy now." Maria's eyes were bright. "You helped start that. Don't forget it." Christmas morning arrived with Emma's delighted shrieks at 6 a.m. Presents opened with the careful ceremony of a child who knew to savor each one. Breakfast that Catherine insisted on making while Daniel and Emma played with new art supplies and books. It was loud and chaotic and perfectly ordinary in ways that felt precious because Daniel finally had the space to appreciate ordinary. His mother left the day after Christmas, promises made to return in spring, video calls scheduled for weekly, the distance between them feeling manageable now that they'd rebuilt connection. The new year arrived with the quiet satisfaction of having survived another 12 months and the tentative hope that the next 12 might be easier. Daniel returned to work on January 2nd to find an envelope on his desk, thick, expensive paper, hand-addressed. Inside was a note from Elena Morrison. "Thank you for the beautiful blanket and your kind words. Sophie is thriving, and I'm slowly learning that asking for help isn't weakness. You taught me that. I wanted you to know that the board approved a new position. Quality Assurance Manager, reporting directly to me. It involves oversight of all QC operations, client relations, and policy development. The salary is 50% above your current rate, and it comes with significant decision-making authority. I'd like you to interview for it. You've more than earned the opportunity." Elena Daniel read the note 3 times, his hands shaking slightly. Quality Assurance Manager, a management position. Direct report to the CEO. A 50% raise that would change everything about his financial security, and all because he'd stopped to help a stranded pregnant woman on Route 47. Jake appeared at his station, grinning. "Did you see the job posting? QA manager position? You're applying, right?" "I don't know. Management is different from what I do now." "It's the evolution of what you do now. You're already consulting for Patterson. You represented Morrison in that client meeting. You helped develop company-wide policy. You're basically doing parts of that job already." Jake leaned against the workstation. "Don't talk yourself out of this because you're scared. Apply. Worst case, they say no. Best case, you get a job you're perfect for." Daniel thought about it all morning, weighing fear against opportunity, comfort against growth. At lunch, he called his mother. "Should I apply for a management position? It would mean more responsibility, more visibility, more of everything that terrifies me about professional life." "Does it excite you, the work itself?" Catherine asked. "Yeah, actually it does. The idea of improving quality systems across the entire operation, working with clients to build better processes, mentoring other inspectors, that all sounds meaningful." "Then apply. Fear is a terrible reason to say no to something meaningful." His mother's voice was firm. "You've spent 3 years in survival mode, Daniel. Maybe it's time to move into growth mode." That afternoon, Daniel submitted his application for Quality Assurance Manager. He attached his resume, wrote a cover letter explaining his vision for the role, and included the feedback from Patterson Industries as evidence of his ability to handle client relations. Then he went back to his regular work and tried not to obsess about the outcome. The interview was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Daniel and 4 other candidates meeting with Elena Morrison and the operations director. Daniel prepared obsessively, reviewing every quality metric, every policy he'd helped develop, every improvement he'd suggested over 6 years of work. Wednesday arrived cold and clear. Daniel wore his interview clothes, dropped Emma at school with a hug for luck, and arrived at Morrison 30 minutes early to settle his nerves. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Elena asked about his vision for quality assurance, his approach to managing people, his ideas for improving client relationships. The operations director, a man named Thomas Park who Daniel had never met, asked technical questions about inspection protocols and failure analysis and continuous improvement methodologies. Daniel answered honestly, drawing on years of hands-on experience and the confidence he'd developed through recent client work. He talked about building a culture where quality wasn't just compliance, but genuine pride in work. He discussed cross-training programs and mentorship structures, and the importance of understanding that quality control wasn't an obstacle to production. It was the foundation that made sustainable production possible. When the interview ended, Elena walked him to the door personally. "Thank you for applying, Daniel. We'll make a decision by end of week. Thank you for the opportunity. Regardless of outcome, I appreciate being considered." Elena smiled. "You know, that day on Route 47, I was terrified. Not just about the car or the baby, but about being alone in a moment when I needed help and not knowing if anyone would stop. You stopped. You helped without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. That's character you can't teach or train. It's just who you are. I did what anyone should do, but most people don't. That's why it matters." Elena extended her hand. "We'll be in touch soon." Daniel returned to his workstation and tried to focus on inspection reports, but his mind kept replaying the interview, analyzing his answers, wondering if he'd said enough or too much or the wrong things entirely. Friday afternoon, Jennifer Reyes called him up to her office. "Daniel, I wanted to tell you personally before we send the official offer letter. The position is yours if you want it. Quality Assurance Manager, starting February 1st. Elena was unanimous in her decision, said you were exactly what Morrison needed for that role." Daniel sat down heavily, trying to process the news. "I got it?" "You got it. Congratulations." Jennifer slid a folder across her desk. "Offer details are here. Take the weekend to review, but I don't think you'll find any surprises. Elena made sure the compensation reflects the value you bring." Daniel opened the folder with shaking hands. The salary was even higher than Elena had mentioned, 60% above his current rate, not 50. The benefits included education reimbursement, flexible scheduling built into the job description, and a clause explicitly protecting accommodation for family emergencies. This is incredibly generous. It's fair compensation for someone who's proven their worth repeatedly. You've earned this, Daniel. Don't doubt that. Jennifer smiled. Now go home and tell your daughter you got the promotion. I bet she'll be excited. Daniel picked up Emma from school with the official offer letter in his bag, and his heart pounding with excitement he was still learning to trust. Emma climbed into the car, chattering about her day, and Daniel waited until they got home before saying, "Em, I have some news." "Good news or bad news?" "Very good news. I got promoted at work. I'm going to be a manager now, which means more responsibility and also more money." Emma's eyes went wide. "Like, how much more money?" "Enough that we can get you those art classes you wanted, and maybe take a real vacation this summer, and not worry quite so much about every expense." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "Things are going to be easier, sweetheart. Not perfect, but easier." "Because you helped Miss Morrison?" "Because a lot of things came together at the right time. But yeah, helping her started it all." Emma hugged him tight. "I'm proud of you, Daddy. Mama would be proud too." That evening, Daniel called his mother, then Mrs. Chen, then the few friends who'd supported him through the difficult years. He shared the news with gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The loss and struggle and fear, yes, but also the moments of grace, the people who'd helped, the choices that had mattered even when they'd seemed costly. The following Monday, Daniel accepted the position formally. He spent his last 2 weeks as a quality control specialist, training his replacement and documenting processes he'd developed over 6 years. His coworkers threw him a small celebration, cake in the break room, handshakes and congratulations, genuine happiness that one of their own was moving up. February 1st arrived cold and bright. Daniel walked into Morrison Manufacturing Solutions as Quality Assurance Manager, his new office on the second floor of the executive building, his first team meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Elena met him in the hallway outside his office, carrying a folder and looking tired but happy. "Welcome to management. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and exciting in equal measure." "That's about right." Elena handed him the folder. "First project. Patterson Industries wants to expand our contract significantly. They're impressed with the quality metrics and the consulting work you've been doing. I need you to handle the technical discussions and help structure the agreement. I can do that. I know you can. That's why you're here. Elena started to leave, then turned back. Daniel, I want to thank you again. Not just for Route 47, though that started everything, but for showing me what this company could be if we actually lived our values, for being willing to be vulnerable in front of 300 people, for helping build something better. I should be thanking you. You gave me my job back when you didn't have to. You created opportunities I never would have imagined. We helped each other. That's how it's supposed to work. Elena smiled. Now go be brilliant at this job. I have high expectations. Daniel spent his first day meeting with his team, 6 quality control specialists who looked at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity, wondering if one of their own becoming management would change the dynamic or preserve it. He talked to them honestly about his vision, his commitment to supporting their work, his belief that quality assurance was the backbone of everything Morrison did. By the end of the week, Daniel had restructured 2 inspection protocols, initiated conversations with 3 other clients about quality consulting, and started developing a mentorship program for new QC specialists. The work was challenging and engaging and meaningful in ways he'd always wanted his career to be. Emma adapted to the changes with the resilience she'd inherited from both parents. The art classes Daniel enrolled her in became her new passion, her drawings evolving from simple animal sketches to complex compositions that showed genuine talent. Her asthma remained controlled, her confidence grew, and she continued to be the bright, thoughtful child who reminded Daniel daily why every sacrifice had been worth it. March brought spring break and the promised trip to Florida. Daniel and Emma spent a week with Catherine, building sand castles and collecting shells and swimming in the warm ocean that was so different from their Midwest life. Emma thrived in her grandmother's attention, and Daniel felt the last pieces of his grief armor finally fall away, allowing him to be fully present in joy instead of just managing through difficulty. On their last evening in Florida, watching Emma play in the waves at sunset, Catherine said, "You've built a beautiful life, Daniel. From ashes that would have buried most people. Sarah would be so proud." I hope so. I try to live in a way that honors what she taught me. You're succeeding. Look at Emma. Happy, confident, kind. Look at yourself. Thriving professionally, present emotionally, open to support and connection. That's success that matters. Catherine squeezed his hand. You stopped to help someone when it cost you everything. And you gained back more than you lost. That's not luck, honey. That's the universe rewarding character. Daniel thought about Route 47, about those 3 seconds when he'd chosen to pull over instead of drive past, about how that single choice had cascaded into transformation he couldn't have predicted. I'm grateful, he said simply, for all of it. The hard parts and the good parts and everything in between. They flew home to a Midwest spring that was finally shaking off winter, to Emma's school and Daniel's work and the life they'd built together. Daniel settled back into his role as QA manager with growing confidence, his team responding to leadership that valued their expertise and supported their growth. In early April, Elena returned from parental leave, looking tired but radiant in the way new mothers did when they were overwhelmed but happy. She stopped by Daniel's office her first day back. "How's Sophie?" Daniel asked. "Exhausting and perfect. I understand single parenting pressures in a whole new way now." Elena laughed, slightly manic with sleep deprivation. "Having my mother here helping has been essential. I don't know how you managed alone." "Barely, and not nearly as well as I pretended." Daniel gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Welcome back. We kept everything running in your absence." "I see that. Jennifer briefed me on the Patterson expansion, the new client acquisitions, the mentorship program you started. You've been busy. The work is engaging. I'm enjoying it more than I expected." Elena studied him with the assessing look he'd come to recognize. "I'm glad. You deserve work that fulfills you, not just work that pays bills, though it's doing both now. Thanks to you. Thanks to you stopping when someone needed help. Thanks to you being willing to tell your story. Thanks to you bringing integrity to everything you do." Elena stood. "I have about 600 emails to get through, but I wanted to check in. Lunch sometime this week? I'd like to hear your thoughts on some operational changes I'm considering. Absolutely. Just let me know when. After Elena left, Daniel sat in his office. His office, still surreal after months, and looked at the framed photo on his desk. Sarah and Emma from 5 years ago, both of them laughing at something outside the frame, frozen in a moment of pure joy. "We did it, Sarah," Daniel whispered to the photo. "We're okay. More than okay. We're actually thriving." He imagined Sarah's response, her voice clear in his memory. "I never doubted you. You're exactly the father I knew you'd be." That evening, Daniel picked up Emma from art class. She'd created a watercolor of the Florida beach that her instructor praised as exceptional, and they stopped for ice cream to celebrate. Sitting outside the shop in the April sunshine, watching Emma eat her cone with intense focus to prevent dripping, Daniel felt the particular piece of a life finally balanced. Not perfect, never perfect, but good, stable, full of possibility instead of fear. Emma looked up from her ice cream, her expression turning serious. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think you'll ever get married again? Have more kids?" The question surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Emma was getting older, understanding family dynamics in more complex ways. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday. Would that bother you?" "No, I think maybe it would be nice to have more family." Emma licked ice cream thoughtfully. "Mrs. Rodriguez at school said that love doesn't run out, that loving new people doesn't mean you stop loving the people you lost. Is that true?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, Em, that's true. Loving someone new wouldn't mean I love Mama any less. She'll always be part of us." "Okay, I just wanted to make sure." Emma returned to her ice cream. "Because I think you deserve to be happy, Daddy. Like, really happy. Not just okay happy." Out of the mouths of children, Daniel thought again. Wisdom he was still learning to accept. "I am happy, Em. Right now with you, I'm genuinely happy." "Good. Me too." They finished their ice cream and drove home through the spring evening, the radio playing songs Emma sang along to, the future stretching ahead with possibility Daniel was finally willing to believe in. The months that followed brought continued growth, professionally, personally, emotionally. Daniel's team won a Company Excellence Award for quality improvements. Emma's artwork was selected for the Regional Student Exhibition. Daniel's consulting work with Patterson expanded to include 2 other clients. His mother visited again in summer, and they took Emma to the state fair and spent a week just being family. In September, Daniel stood in front of a new group of managers for quarterly training, teaching the flexible scheduling policy that had saved his life and transformed Morrison's culture. He told his story again, refined from dozens of retellings, but still fundamentally true. A father who'd chosen integrity over security, a stranger who'd chosen justice over policy, a company that had chosen to become better instead of staying the same. After the training, a young woman approached him nervously. "Mr. Reed, thank you for sharing your story. I'm a new supervisor, and I'm also a single mom. I was worried about how to balance both. Hearing you talk about it makes me feel like maybe I can do this." "You can absolutely do this. The policy exists to support you. Use it." Daniel handed her his business card. "And if you ever run into problems, if someone tries to make you choose between your child and your job, you come directly to me. That's what I'm here for." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Walking back to his office, Daniel thought about the ripple effects of that afternoon on Route 47. One choice to stop, one choice to help, one choice that had created space for hundreds of choices to be different, better, more humane. That evening, Emma had a friend over for dinner, Sophia from school, the one who'd taught her the hand clap game months ago. The 2 girls giggled through homework and then art projects that covered the kitchen table in paper and markers. Daniel made spaghetti, the good kind with Mrs. Chen's meatball recipe, and listened to their chatter with the particular contentment of a parent who'd given their child stability enough to form lasting friendships. After Sophia's mother picked her up, Emma helped Daniel clean the kitchen. "Daddy, Sophia said her mom got a new job with better hours because of the changes at Morrison. Her mom works in packaging." "That's great. I'm glad the new policies are helping people. She said her mom talks about you sometimes, says you're the reason things got better for a lot of parents. Emma looked up at him seriously. You helped a lot of people, Daddy, not just us. I just told the truth about what wasn't working. A lot of people helped fix it. But you started it by stopping that day, by doing what Mama taught us. Emma dried the last dish and put it away. I think the most important thing isn't the new job or the money or any of that. I think it's that you showed people that being good matters, that it's not stupid to help someone even when it costs you something. Daniel knelt down to Emma's eye level. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, she said, smiling the smile that was pure Sarah, mischievous and warm and full of love. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat on the back porch in the September darkness, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. He thought about Sarah and how much he missed her. He thought about Elena Morrison and baby Sophie. He thought about Route 47 and broken down Mercedes and the 3 seconds that had changed everything. He thought about the life he'd built from loss, about the community that had held him when he couldn't hold himself, about the small choices that accumulated into transformation. And he thought about Emma's words. Being good matters. In a world that often seemed to reward the opposite, that truth felt radical. But it was the truth Sarah had lived by, the truth Daniel had tried to honor, the truth that had proven itself again and again in the years since that November afternoon. Being good mattered. Stopping to help people mattered. Choosing integrity over convenience mattered. Living in a way that taught the next generation that character was worth preserving mattered. Daniel Reed, quality assurance manager, single father, man who'd lost everything and had fought his way back to more than everything, finally, completely believed it. The story that had begun with a choice on a rainy road had become a story about building something better. Not just for himself, but for Emma, for his coworkers, for the strangers whose lives might be touched by the culture shift one man's integrity had sparked. It was a story about second chances and the people who made them possible, about falling apart and being put back together by community and grace and the stubborn refusal to give up. It was a story about love, the love of a father for his daughter, the love embedded in choosing to help a stranger, the love that built systems designed to support people instead of punish them. Most of all, it was a story about truth, that doing the right thing sometimes cost everything and sometimes gave you back more than you'd lost. That stopping to help someone in need could change not just one life, but hundreds. That integrity, character, and basic human decency still mattered in a world that often suggested they didn't. Daniel stood and went inside, locked the door, checked on Emma one more time, and went to bed with the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived in alignment with the values that defined him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments where he'd have to choose between easy and right. And Daniel